This is the moment you've all been waiting for. Live with the best father and son team on the internet. It's time for Homie and the Dude.
Welcome everyone to Homie and the Dude, episode number 36, with returning guest, the wise and mystical and all-powerful Daniel Ingram, one of the leaders of the Pragmatic Dharma Movement, a friend and a very, very gracious and dear person. We are honored again to have you in our presence. So thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Delightful to be here as always. Great to see your smiling faces again.
Nice.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you, dude. How have you been? How's everything been in the last year since we last spoke? Obviously, COVID's taken up since then. What's life been like on your side of the pond?
Yeah, life here is obviously something of a mess in the United States, but we are blessed in that we can stay far away from the crazy on 50 beautiful acres in the foothills of the southern Appalachian Mountains, and with a beautiful garden and 20 miles of unspoiled forest behind my house, and live on delivered groceries and Amazon, and with a good internet connection. So we're getting some work done and having some fun. But yeah, it's Carol and I are just chilling and cooking good food and trying to make the world a slightly better place through our various endeavors. So it's been good times. How about you all?
Nice.
Yeah, it's been a mixed bag for sure for us. I mean, we have had moments where we've been able to come together as a family. Over Christmas was awesome. So Tracy and I came and met Bodhi and Nikki's parents, and that was just an awesome, effectively 24 hours. That's what it was. And since then we've been separate again. So I've seen, and Tracy has seen Bodhi here and there, like dropping stuff off and sort of at a distance outside for moments in time. But in that sense, it's sucked pretty bad. Otherwise, we are having a great time developing our podcast, coming up with different ways and different angles to pursue this, sort of this medium. Have enjoyed awesome guests, so it's been super fun that way. We're very much looking forward to post-COVID and just bringing this all together and bringing all the learning that we've had into just a little bit more of hopefully a more impactful presentation when we're together. It seems to work a lot better. So what about you, Boots?
Yeah, for me, it's been a very hard year because I'm in my early 20s, and I've just come back from traveling, and I returned to the UK to spend a very small amount of time here getting my driver's license, and then leaving to go live in New Zealand was the plan. And boy, do I wish I was there now. The weird thing is, lockdown happened in the UK in like February, and since then it's been a case of cool, now we're here and we're trapped. We can't really travel out, and also with travel comes the risk of exposure and all of that, as well as also carrying it and passing it to people if we already have it, which is something that we definitely don't want to be doing. So we ended up staying, and we've been in the UK since. Obviously, me and Tom started the podcast and started working hard with that and developing new ideas. We've spent a lot of time doing a lot of creative stuff behind the scenes that we're hopefully bringing to like the channel soon, in terms of like tabletop gaming and a few other bits and pieces. And it's been really creative, really inspiring. I think for me, it feels, there's days where I don't feel as great about what we're doing and about the process, because it's a grind, but there's other days that really do feel incredible and feel like I'm progressing as a person. I've found my jam, I guess is how I'd describe it. So both a really good year in terms of personal progression and finding out my own powers in terms of dealing with being trapped in a house for days on end. And I'm in an apartment in a city, so I don't have green. I don't have, there's a building across out my window, and there's like no sun comes into the building. So it's pretty hard going in terms of like that kind of stuff. So finding out my own mental boundaries, I guess, is something else that I've been enduring and experiencing. So other than that, I've been all right. I've been pretty damn good. I can't complain. People are in far worse states than I am right now, and I'm thankful for what I have been able to do and accrue over this year that I've been trapped inside. would be my point.
Right. So here's the deal. This is what we did. This is a little bit different than the last time we met. We put a post out to Reddit and to the Dharma Overground, asking people, well, actually setting the stage, saying we're gonna have Daniel on again, and what are some questions that you might have, that thing that you've been thinking about, whether it's in your practice or just further afield with the community, within the Buddhist community, within the Pragmatic Dharma community, whatever it is, that's at the back of your mind, that's tickling that every now and again. And if you have one, can you offer up a question, and we'll do our best to ask Daniel on the show. So on the back of that, we had, I think, 165 posts on Reddit. So they weren't all questions, but certainly that's what the interaction was. So that's pretty rich. And something like, over 25, 30 on Dharma Overground as well. So we won't be able to cover all of that ground. And so we sifted through things, and we want to balance this out a little bit and make it more of a, certainly some meaty stuff for those individuals that are deep into their practice and really asking some technical stuff, but also just taking a step back and having you share some of your experience and some of your recommendations for those people that are just kind of getting into this world, just sort of understanding what meditation feels for them, how it fits into their life, that sort of thing. So that's our objective.
And
Cool.
And with that, the first question, we'll start off with a layman's one. I'll call it a layman's one. It's a nice question I think could help loads of people. And what I'll say, Daniel, is pretend I'm someone that has never meditated before, and I'm completely fresh to the idea. What would you say is the Daniel Ingram starter pack for meditating and spirituality and all that kind of stuff? Is there like a specific subset of videos that I should get into? Books? Do I need like a yoga mat? Like what do I need? Some special like clothes? Like what's the gear that I need in it? And what do I need? A quiet room? Like what's the situation? Give me some thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one I get a lot, actually, and I'm moderately terrible at answering, just to be honest straight out of the gate, because unfortunately I then can't help but think about, like, who is this person? What do they want to do? What do they like? What religious tradition are they coming from? What are their aesthetics? Like, do they want a bunch of fancy gear and stuff, or are they coming from, like a Catholic background or a Hindu background or an atheistic background? Are they like really technical people? Are they like really intuitive? Have they had experiences already and they're getting into meditation to make sense of those? Or have they not had any sort of mystically spiritual experiences at all, and they're wanting to calm down or be more present or be better at work or deal with some stress or whatever it is? And so unfortunately, I have to know more about the person, but I can tell you a few things that I just end up recommending again and again. So there's a book called A Path with Heart by Jack Cornfield, which I think is just a great sort of overview. Yes, it's coming from some, specific background. Yeah, it has its language it prefers, but it really does a very nice, even-ish treatment of a lot of things as these kinds of books go. And if you liked that one, you could then pick up After the Ecstasy, The Laundry, for the slightly deeper dive into the reality of being a human on the spiritual path. And then if someone likes just sort of basic meditation ideas, Mindfulness in Plain English by Bhante Gunaratana is one that I recommend to a lot of people. And you don't actually necessarily even need a quiet room, because there are meditation styles that really just embrace whatever sensations come in. And so if you happen to be in a noisy place, you can practice, and then the sensations you'll be noticing might involve noise. If you're in a quiet place, that's obviously totally cool. And but like, people don't need a whole lot of gear. The people doing this stuff were monks and nuns back in the day that had almost nothing, and a bowl and a robe and the dusty ground under a tree, and they seem to do fine. But sometimes kit is cool, and so but that's a whole nother huge topic. So that would be my short answer. But it really depends a lot on the person, and there's so many cool traditions and info out there. So it is hard to know where to begin, because I like asking people a lot about what they're wanting to do and where they're coming from.
Of course, and I guess I phrased that maybe a bit bad. I was meaning, yeah, within the resources, and yeah, thanks for naming like some of those books. That's like exactly the kind of thing that I was looking for. So yeah, no, I think that's perfect. I think, for anyone out there who is looking to it, picking up a couple of those books, like you said, just getting into the practice of it, because I guess with like anything, it's repetition, it's practice, it's learning when you're struggling, when you're doing well, and finding the balance in bringing it into your life a little bit. So yeah, thanks for that. That answers that question for on my end perfectly, and I hope it answers it for a lot of other people. Tom, did you have something you want to say?
Well, I'm going to circle back to that. If we got into a little bit more of a specific situation, if you were to say about, because I know you've dabbled here and there, and you have your sort of tools that you use in your own practice. But if you were to say, okay, for me to push forward in my practice, maybe kind of what would that look like? What would that question look like reframed?
So it would be for someone who has meditated in sporadic doses with both Buddhist and Zen Buddhist background, I guess, in terms of knowledge and like maybe place of like trialing things. With then, I would say, in hopes, what I'm hoping to gain is maybe some mental peace, some serenity. It feels like when I go to bed, it's a little bit jumbled up in there, and I need to clear out some of the trash, So yeah, there you go. That would be an example of maybe more specific that can help you answer it, Daniel, to Tom's point.
Yeah, so in terms of mental trash, one of the things that seems like a totally surprising answer for some, but probably not at all for others, is just serious cardio. Like, do more serious cardio earlier in the day if your physiology allows it. Whoever might be listening to this, something that really gets your heart rate up for some reasonable period of time in some safe and healthy way, I think actually helps to just clear out a whole lot of things. It doesn't sound like a fancy solution, but I actually think it's a really important solution. The next thing for clearing out stuff, there are a bunch of different approaches. So one that people who listen to my stuff routinely are going to be surprised by is mantras, actually. So mantras are a fascinating way to take up some of the mental space and learn to hear the inner voice in a way that is then doing something skillful rather than, say, suppressing it. So as a lot of the TM kids, transcendental meditation kids noticed back in the day, and still do because it's still an active tradition, but I think more popular some years ago, is that if you learn to fill your mind with thoughts you are intentionally wanting, then or sounds or voice or whatever, then a lot of the other stuff sort of gets crowded out. We do this a lot on fire casino retreats. So pick a good mantra or prayer or whatever you like based on the tradition and aesthetics you're coming from, and that is actually one of the useful tips and tricks. And then obviously a standard thing is figuring out how to ground the energy down. So we spend a lot of the day up in our heads, staring at screens, a lot of what, people using chakra models might say very like sixth chakra sort of, we're up here. Then just figuring out how to tune into anything basically neck and down. So figuring out how to feel where like one's attention is, if anything's like buzzy or edgy or moving, and then like pulling it down and figuring out how to move attention farther down in the body, either slowly or more dramatically, and pull it down towards the feet is another fun one that people can use for just calming down. And then similar to mantras, loving kindness practices and related compassion and sympathetic joy practices, as well as equanimity practices, I highly recommend. And you can find those detailed in a cool book called Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness by Sharon Salzberg. And I think those can also be super useful practices, particularly if you incorporate the bodily feelings that may go with phrases of well-wishing. I think that can be very, very helpful.
Thanks for watching this episode. We really appreciate you supporting Homie and the Dude.
Please hit us with the Holy Trinity, like our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. Just search @Homie and the Dude. It all really helps. Okay. Do you know what, there's lots of stuff there that you said that I think is really, really great. And one thing I wanted to ask, when you said move the like buzz, did you say attention or tension in of its tension or attention?
Well, actually kind of both. So attention and tension kind of go together, and buzz and attention sort of go together, and the energy, the energetics sort of follow those and or are those, depending on what sort of ontologies you want to bring to this. But if you start like just feeling sort of the head and the buzziness in the head and the sounds in the head, you can sort of then feel like the lower boundary of where that buzziness is. And as you feel that lower boundary and then start to feel kind of below that lower boundary and go, okay, where is the edge of this tensiony, buzzy thing? And it usually is somewhere like here-ish. And then if you start kind of actively and gently sort of patiently trying to pull that down, 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 then you can sort of feel that moving front of where both attention and tension and that sort of edgy feeling are. But most people notice that as they start to pull it down like below their solar plexus and down into their pelvic region, the Taoists are all going to be saying Dantian at this point, which is sort of the point I'm trying to get to as well, which is some energy center kind of down, kind of back behind your navel or belly button. Then a lot of people will notice that energetics and mind and all kinds of things get much more well behaved. And so that's also a fascinating learnable skill that is just useful in a lot of situations.
100%. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Thank you for
including
clearing that up for
emotionally
me.
charged ones, actually. It's a good thing to practice for emotionally charged situations.
Oh, awesome. No, yeah, I was going to say, because no, I was just a little bit confused when I was thinking about like attention moving it down. Cool. No, that explains that awesomely. Okay. I think for me, that's that and especially for emotionally charged things. Now, like, I won't say that I'm the most aggressive or angry person on the planet, because I'm really not. But I definitely have my moments when I'm angry, and I do flare up, and I like have some of what I call my grandfather's anger in me. And yeah, like I think you're totally right in those situations. Taking a breath, working it down, figuring out where the stuff is, and kind of working on it is definitely a thing that could help me, and I'm sure many other people, either who have worse tempers than me, equal tempers, or even lesser tempers than myself. So go for it, Tom.
All right. So what I guess had the luxury of doing is picking and choosing some questions that were also interests of mine, let's say. So I'm in this space, and there was about 3 or 4 questions in this space. So I have them all listed, and we'll just see how much of this we want to dig into. But the first one is, it was on the subreddit, and I'll actually quote the question. It says, I'd like to hear Daniel talk about the specifics of how the second and third path moments present themselves to him. There's plenty of info on how stream entry presents itself, but finding people nailing down exactly what happened when they transitioned to second and or third path is frustratingly rare. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, so just to orient, if we've got some listeners in the crowd who are not familiar with the sort of technical language, so
Yeah,
this is map theory coming out of Theravada Buddhism or old school Buddhism, where they have a progressive model of enlightenment or awakening or whatever you want to call it, which involves 4 paths. So you would attain first path, the first stage of awakening, and then second path, and then third path, and then fourth path would be something called Arhatship, which in theory is the goal of Theravada Buddhism, and then how that relates to Buddhahood is a whole nother thing. But and then, so this middle territory is what they're talking about when people are somewhat awakened, which for some people is going to seem like a contradiction in terms, or sort of partially awakened, some, using sort of more of a materialist meat model, some centers in their brain kind of have flipped over to the other way of perceiving things, and maybe some haven't. It can feel like experience, some aspects of it are very sort of well-behaved and clear, and others not so much. And then it is very true that it is quite hard to find information on this middle territory, even in the old texts, which go on and on and on for thousands and thousands of pages about all kinds of stuff. There is very, very little on this. And so the traditional model would say that at second path, you sort of attenuate greed, hatred, and delusion in some way. And then at third path, those would be eliminated. That's using something called the Ten-Fetter Model. And this is, or third path would eliminate them for coarse things, but not related to jhanas and subtle things about, conceit and last sort of subtle residual stuff. to be a little more technically precise. Okay, so that's some basic theory, but then we have sort of the pragmatic take on this, the phenomenologist take on this. And from a phenomenology point of view, so talking about this territory is complicated because a lot of people will think they're in it when they actually kind of aren't. They might have had some powerful experiences, may not be in this territory. Some people can be in it and not even recognize that they're in it. So that also gets diagnostically complicated. This is actually literally could be an entire podcast. Okay, all those qualifiers aside, I'm going to attempt to answer the question. So the way this works in theory is you go through what's called the stages of insight. You get first path. And stages of insight, spiritual highs, spiritual lows, you come to equanimity with all that, reality synchronizes, converges perfectly, perceived, disappears, reappears, and then you kind of cycle back through that a bunch of times, kind of reviewing it. And then at some point, people will start to notice aspects of their mind and experience that are not well illuminated, and it may seem like new, fresh stages of insight that they don't have mastery over are starting to show up in their life. And then if they get farther and farther into that territory, then eventually they may go through a whole new sort of progressive insight at this deeper level of depth, which usually tends to be more intricate, more complicated, can be confused by the fact that they may have still have access to previous stage stuff. So it's sort of weird middle territory, very, very hard to map, even for teachers and certainly for practitioners who are going through it. But then what can happen is suddenly the mind at this new level of stuff or thought or experience or whatever that is now being worked on perfectly comprehends it, synchronizes, converges, disappears, reappears, something called three doors phenomenology for those who are familiar with my book. And this can happen a bunch of different ways. Either reality can collapse in or get ripped away, or sort of a strobe in place and disappear, or then sort of do these weird rotational folding kind of things that are, sort of odd and involve some sort of collapse or of duality in some kind of way. Okay, then reality disappears, reappears, and all of a sudden someone comes out and they've got a level of afterglow after this fruition that they may not have had in a long time. So after the mind does this, which feels very, very good, it feels like a very right thing for the mind to do, there's a sense of chemical reward. So it feels like you've got some really cool, happy relief chemicals in your body, in your mind. There may be an increased sense of clarity. And then most people will notice that suddenly all of this territory they were having to work hard to integrate, they can suddenly just sit down, cruise through quickly in one sit, get back up to equanimity, which is the nice stuff, and then resynchronize, disappear, reappear. And then they'll find that all of a sudden it feels like they're back in review phase where they're cycling much more rapidly. And people then describing what the changes are at second path, the traditionalists are going to be a little pissed off by what I'm going to say here because it's not going to conform to exactly all the doctrinal stuff. Sorry, kids. But for those a little more pragmatic and phenomenological, a lot of people will notice something of increased emotional resilience. They'll notice that emotions move through more rapidly. They'll notice that things that were bothering them just don't stick like they did, that desires, angers, fears, griefs just have an increased capacity. They may show up and then they're just seen and then they just disappear and are not reinforced in some kind of way to the degree that they were before. That there is some attenuation of problematic emotions that relates to how well they're perceived, how quickly they move through, and the degree to which they just don't seem to be sticky. They just seem to be like stuff happening. And yeah, there might occur and there might be some human physiology, but it's a lot less sticky. So it's more kind of Teflon mind, as some people have described this. And then, so that's sort of second path. And a lot of people also, more technical practitioners may notice an increased ability for microphenomenology and really noticing sub-stages within stages and sub-stages and the intricate details and nuances of the path. And so this is when some people who are like into the really advanced modeling stuff will start going, oh my God, that fractal stuff you talk about in your book that I always thought was total bullshit. Actually, not seeing that, and I get why you wrote that down. And so like, this is something that some people will notice, these little sub parts of the path, this wiggle and this frequency and this alignment and this thing kind of looks like this, but really is the next phase of that. And that's anyway. So, and that's something that's really exciting for people in this stage and really annoying and technical and seems totally, like a bunch of useless talk to anybody who isn't. So apologies if this is an audience for whom this doesn't apply. And then third path, basically the same thing again. So at some point, a new level of mind, new set of stages, new whatever, you go through a whole new progressive insight that you've had to learn. You don't have mastery of it. It takes work, it takes time, it takes learning some of the same lessons again, but much more broadly, much more inclusively. So third path for me, and the modeling ways I generally think of this. So there is some variability in how people report this and the aspects they appreciate, right? This is a complex topic. Again, so I'm going to be like very coarsely summary. You go through the whole thing again, same 3 doors thing, disappear, reappear, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, something again, really different. Again, much increased afterglow after the fruition. Now you're the sense of, oh, wow, my brain really is operating differently. And for some people, and I'm going to generalize, they'll start to notice that this is much more about being here in real time. So where if a lot of people in the lower paths, they may have fruitions that, disappear and they get their chemical hit and they come out and they're like, well, that was really good. That was what I was looking for. That has something to do with ultimate reality. For people of third path, this space, this luminous transient immediacy all the way through, much more seems to be the punchline in a way that becomes progressively much more integrated into experience. And so for those people, like they'll be walking around in the sense that this is it. This has always been it. How could this not be it? This luminous, transient, empty, but present, naturally unfolding moment is now something that they go, oh, how could I have had this sense of, realization is in the future? How could I have had this sense of a true past? How does it even seem there's an attainer here in this moment that really is a continuous thing when all, experience becomes so much more predominant as the answer, which is really important. But there, at this level, there's still subtle or sometimes not so subtle layers of mind that are not still well illuminated by this. But when people say like 95% of the time, like I'm getting it and everything's just happening and knowing itself, wearing it, knowing itself where it is, doing what it does, this is the kind of thing that some third pathy people will talk about. But the problem is it's confusing because even some people like in high equanimity before stream entry will say stuff like that. And some people in the arising and passing away, which is stage even, before that, will say stuff like that. Like everything's it. I see the unitive emptiness of the cosmos or whatever. And so the problem is there are a bunch of mimics, and sorting this out is challenging, to put it gently, and really requires long-term performance testing and a highly skeptical eye. Sorry if that was too long an answer, but it's a real question, and it deserved it because there is a real void of information on this stuff. And then one more thing, out from there can be a lot of cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles within cycles, big cycles, little cycles. And so in this kind of middly territory, a lot of people will just talk about yet another cycle, yet another layer, yet another level, and then some weeks or months later, they're saying, oh yeah, and yet another layer and another layer. And it seems to go on and on and on. So that's very common for people to be dealing with. And that can be frustrating for people who think they're just going to be 4 layers to this thing and then done and good. Yeah, good luck with that. There are a few people it works out for, most people no.
Yeah.
You know what
so
is
go ahead. Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Tom.
What's your reaction to that, Bo?
Actually, I have a lot of interesting questions. So my first thought is, it sounds like what you're saying is that this is a super complicated thing, that not only to get clear evidence on a clear path for the second and third paths requires like field testing almost, where you guys both, it sounds like both within science and within spirituality, there needs to be some sort of testing in like almost period where you're kind of working out the results of what is going on. Now, obviously we talk about a period of time, but I like you've said, and the big thing that I'm getting from what you said is that this is a varied experience for every single person. Now, there's key things that each person experiences in their like journey, but at the end of the day, your journey is completely different to Tom's is different to yours, Daniel, and if I were to go on, it'd be different to both of yours. And what it sounds like you're kind of saying is that it's something where you're just going to have to go through it, and this time period that would need to be tested might be 10 years for one specific person, where it might be much less for another person, dependent on who you are. The one thing I really wanted to ask at the end of that, just so I can understand as a person, so what path are you guys on individually? Like Tom, where are you, and Daniel, where are you guys at the moment? Like, are you on paths? Are you off the path? Like what? Like, have you invented a new path? Like, what's like, where are you guys at in this process? I'm just interested, because for me, obviously, as someone who can't visually picture what you're saying when you're saying like equanimity and like all this stuff, understanding like a placement of a number, oh, you are path number 1, gives me at least a general idea of where you guys kind of are in the process. So either one of you,
Nice one.
please enlighten me.
Tom, you want this first or me?
Sure. I'm happy to take it first. I think, I mean, as far as like out there in the public, people know where you stand on this. It'd certainly
Yeah.
be interesting for you to share it as well. But, and we've talked about this. I don't know if you remember when we were in Bristol, Daniel, we were, you know, walking around the harbor loop, and
Oh, I remember the conversation well, actually. Yeah.
yeah. And so,
Beautiful day.
yeah. And we talked about, you know, your point, Bodes, which is this needs consideration. It needs field testing. It needs a perspective away from that moment. You know, when Daniel said there's that, you know, sort of that synchronous moment that also has a bit of what they call an afterglow. That's that almost that chemical hit. You need to kind of have some space from that and to look at it from afar and assess it with a fair and clear mind, because it's really hard to assess it when you're in it, right? It feels like it's not a real fair assessment. So my assessment now, after having had that distance over the course of probably, I guess it's been a year and just over a year and a half, is I'm pretty confident that I am. I'm pretty confident that I am a stream enterer. I'm not so confident, and this is why I brought this question up, of where I am thereafter, because I don't think I'm third path, but I'm not sure whether I'm second path or not. So that's kind of my feel right now. And I think, to your point, Daniel, what I am working on is these just repeated cycles. And I have cycles every single sit that I do every single day. It's that cycle just is very consistent, right? You just know kind of almost by the minute, you know, kind of where you're going to get and how you're going to get there. And I mean, it's different sometimes, and aspects of the cycle can be more intense on certain cycles and less intense on others. But it's very predictable. But what I find is that I will have moments where I'm like, this is a new level of understanding of what integration really means, right? And I'll say that, and I'll be like, this is clearly the most integrated I've been. And then literally like a week later, I'll top it. Not by a lot, but just a little bit of just a little bit more understanding. And the thing is, you don't think you can top it. You think you've maxed it out at that moment. But there's always seems to be a little bit more. These layers are very thin salami slices of understanding of the of what full integration really is. And I'm just sort of conjecturing what it is. But those salami slices are coming off pretty consistently now. So to answer your question, Boats, I think I am confidently a stream enterer, not confident whether I am just between stream entry and second path, or between second path and third path.
Cool. And that sense that it is hard to know, and that sense of layers and integration, and that sense of, oh my golly, really, there's more, oh, wow, okay, and oh wow, and that, oh wait, that, okay, that, and that sort of continued amazement at the possible depths of the thing is, you know, very commonly reported. And the attitude towards it, I think, which is just appreciating that and appreciating the unfolding of the process, is one of the best ones. I think the map theory is really there to help point to some possibilities and to some things to look for that people may not see, and to help people when they get thrown off their game. But if they're paying good attention and not really missing stuff, and you know, and not being thrown off their game by some experience, either totally overcalling it or totally being thrown or wrecked by it or whatever, then a lot of the map theory is actually not that helpful, and just sort of becomes one more comparative thing where we get the mind habit of thinking there is a true future in which these other attainments occur, or a true past in which this actual thing happened, when really there's just this unfolding immediate moment, and realization at its best is nothing other than the natural unfolding immediate moment, clearly comprehending its own intrinsic luminosity and ungraspability. So anyway, so but yeah, and then obviously I, you know, claim fourth path and have for a while now, almost 18 years, and I'm satisfied with that diagnosis because everything seems to just be happening. And the cool thing is, this is a learnable skill. And the other cool thing is the fractal of layers of it unfolding and integrating and going deeper appears to not be infinite. There is an end to them, after which all of the aspects of your experience are incorporated into some sort of wise perspective. And that hopefully is at least reassuring to people that if they keep paying good attention to what's actually going on, that the path can progress to something that delivers something that's really nice and clear and helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
it's
know
a
what?
great question, Bodhi, and I think probably important to share out as well.
Yeah, I think something you just said then that was a little bit mind-boggling, I guess I'll
Is that when
say.
you went like this?
Yeah, is when you basically what you said, which I think is really awesome, and it's because it's something that applies to anything where you have to put time in to learn and become a master at something, which in life is pretty much everything. So, what you said is really nice. Is that for some people who aren't focused on it, that map becomes almost like not a negative thing, but it becomes this thing of like you're almost reaching for something that what you need to be doing is being in the moment and just living through it and focusing on. And it's the same thing. You look at like an MMA fighter. It's like, cool, get in the gym, do the training, do the, if it's a writer, it's cool, get on the page, do the writing, make sure that I'm getting my X amount of words out a day and what so on and so forth. And just focusing on what I'm doing there, not what's ahead or behind. And then what you said, which was even more interesting, I think that in some ways both contradicted and applied to what you said, was you then go, but it's good to have the map to be aware of where you are. And also for you, Daniel, to go, I've kind of gotten to where the end of the map. So I can tell you there is an end. And for any of you who are listening, there is an end. So feel comfort in that. But don't worry about the map in the moment. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's
Right.
it's a really interesting headspace of you have to be very present, both when you're thinking about your experiences with it, as well as also when you're doing it. And Tom, something I want to reference that you said that is the only thing that I can relate to is you mentioned the afterglow. And again, I haven't reached high enough meditation accolades to be able to admit or even lie that I've experienced an afterglow. However, I have experienced the afterglow when taking psychedelics, and definitely the days after psychedelics. For me, usually I get 3 days of really strong afterglow afterwards, and then I get a really hard 4th day of almost like depression that like hits me basically. And it's super interesting that it works in that way. But I know exactly what you mean. That actually during those days, and typically, I do it with people that I enjoy spending time with, and so you in those moments you come away in those 3 days and I'm like, oh, I love that person so much, like, oh, like amazing, and like I worked this out and like I managed to do this and like I look back at it like, oh yeah, incredible. And then a week later you look back and you go, okay, so I did work some stuff out, but I'm still a fuck up and I'm still a mess. So I haven't acted on most of it because I'm still struggling with life stuff and I have other shit going on now and my job. And so I know exactly what you mean when you're talking about that afterglow moment of being like, wow. And then after that, not diminishing the wow in any way, shape or form, because in the moment, that is your truth and that is the honesty of that moment. So it is a wow. But you look back and you go, what did I learn? What was the progression? What can I admit that I definitely gained or didn't gain from that? And I think I totally understand that. That's one thing I can fully relate to. And I fully get that 100%. Do you know what, kind of going off of Daniel, you mentioning that, you kind of ended or feel like you're towards the end of this path. I wanted to ask you an interesting question that I saw in this group basically. And it's basically you say, I don't know what the term is, Tom. Can you
Oh, you mean
fill me
being
with the
an
term?
ARHAT or an Arahant?
Yes, that thank you. I don't want to mispronounce it at all.
Yeah.
But what if in your life, say you're going through your meditation practice, and say one day you unlock something new. We're talking about, you're peeling away these layers. Say, for example, you find a new layer that you're like, holy shit, like I thought I was here, but actually there's like even more extending past that. How is someone in this community who is said, I believe I am here, if you did find the next stage, how would you come back to the community with that information after presenting yourself as such a figure within the community?
Actually, it's an issue we deal with a lot. And actually, we have a whole post on this on the Dharma Overground that's pinned to the best of, but that deals with this because it's actually a pretty common phenomena. And a lot of my friends and colleagues have had all kinds of issues around this, and myself. So I had a number of years where it would seem for some number of months that the thing was really, truly, finally done. And then I would cross into some new meditation stage and it wasn't. And that went on for a number of years in the late 90s to early 2000s. And so I'm extraordinarily embarrassingly familiar with the phenomena, which is why I feel like I can talk about it with some degree of expertise, and lots of my friends have noticed this as well. So it's a super common problem. I think if you're coming up in a map-based tradition with powerful techniques that can be very transformative, we have to be forgiving of ourselves. We have to be forgiving of each other. We have to be able to have some humility and a sense of humor about these things and take it seriously, but also hold it loosely and just recognize that this can be some profoundly compelling stuff, right? And some of these techniques can produce experiences that can last for months or even years that you're just like, oh my golly, wow, if this isn't it, like what could it possibly be? So the potential for satisfaction is definitely there. And it's also worth knowing that I've had a number of interesting sort of shifts in perception and things that I've got something, my experiments in actualism, you can read all about that I've posted on my website, which is some work I did about 9-10 years ago, something like that. I can't quite remember at this point. And that kind of work did some interesting sort of perceptual mods, some funny things related to time and visuals and some other things. And so there's a lot to explore. So I think it's also important for the maps to not be limiting and for the maps not to artificially box people in, to not branching out and playing around and just seeing what other cool stuff the mind can do and what the other options are on other developmental axes as well. So for example, like on fire casino retreats, I've come off it with my visual system seemingly permanently kind of upgraded in some way, just because I had spent so many hundreds of hours just paying so much attention to visuals. And so there are these neat things we can do. And so when I say I'm sort of done, which pisses a lot of people off, but okay, sorry. What I mean is on one very specific axis of development, and there are so many other axes of development. And so it's really important for us not to artificially limit ourselves or think that being done in one kind of sense would necessarily mean done in any other sense. And it's a vast and wild world of meditation out there. So I think that attitude is the most important thing to bring to it, recognizing that there are these cool technical things that we can learn to do and perceptual changes we can make that are also well defined. And so even as wild and interesting as the territory is, there are landmarks that make a lot of straightforward sense when you get to them. You go, oh, okay, just this. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think also, just to clarify this, because I think there is a perceptual problem out there when you say I have completed the insight path and that I'm an Arhat and I have people start using words like enlightened and all of that. There's a specific thing you're saying and there's a specific thing you're not saying, right? And it's important to differentiate those things. So my understanding is that there are three paths, let's say, three strands to the path. One of them has to do with insight, one of them has to do with concentration, and one of them has to do with morality. Now, you can correct me as we go. What you're talking about is you have completed the insight path, right? You've attained the 4 paths of the insight path. I think what you've also said in the past is the concentration path is there is no end to it. You can kind of swim out into those deep waters and explore different things and be lost there for years and decades and find stuff.
Or have a lot of fun there. I mean, lost is a funny term for that kind of wandering, but yeah, people can get sort of lost in that or find incredible stuff out there. It's vast, unfathomably large territory.
Yeah. And then the last, the wisdom or the morality path is the other bit that all of us are continually working on. Am I a generous person? Am I a kind person? Am I listening? Am I aware? Is pride leaking into my life? Is ego leaking into my life? These types of considerations never end. And so when we talk about, some gurus, as it were, that you hear these sort of really sordid stories about them and their students and them in corruption and them and, all this other stuff. They may be way down the insight path or maybe way down the concentration path, but they have not sorted out the morality or the wisdom path. So I just want to clarify this because there seems to be a lot of confusion out there that people are saying, well, if he considers himself to be an Arhat, well, then he's saying that he's completely like at Buddhahood, and that's impossible.
Yeah, no.
And that's not what you're saying.
Definitely not. Yeah, so I don't claim, total psychological perfection or anything even close to it. There's a whole bunch of things I don't claim: total knowledge of how to live perfectly in the world in all situations, total universal knowledge of the, whatever. Like, there are all these things that we imagine just waking up to something extremely straightforward in sense perception will do, and it does some cool stuff, but it doesn't do all of those things in the way that most people dream it would, which is unfortunate, but also means it's attainable, because if you also were expecting it to do all of those things, you'd be waiting a long time.
Yeah. And do you know what you said as well? And I think it's something that weirdly I'm on a negative side of this, which is really interesting. I was reviewing my own stance on this in my head because I'm on a negative side of this. But your whole opinion on, it's an ever-changing like field, as well as individually, it's an ever-changing path. It's an ever-changing field. The map is still changing. People are still writing shit. Those monks thousands of years ago wrote some shit down that was probably wrong. And now we've discovered that it's, or, so on and so forth. There's been thousands of changes and evolutions, we'll call it, not changes, evolutions of the process. And for me, interestingly, I was trying to relate it to my life, and if I could try and understand that, I was thinking within skateboarding, when someone brings something new to skateboarding that people aren't seeing, for example, it's experimental skateboarders like William Spencer, Johnny Geiger, Jason Parks, like people like them, who are doing things that the rest of the community who are like, oh, you got to do traditional street and you got to be like in this box, very much aren't fond of. Now, I am a fan of all of their work and I love what they do for skating, but also I know that in some aspects, I also am like, if you're mole grabbing your skateboard, why are you holding it by the trucks? Like, what's that about? I don't like, that's not a thing we do. Like, why are you doing that? And so it's interesting that I feel the evolution, because I think some of that evolution is beautiful and it's changing the sport and making it incredible. But I'm also on the other side going, yo, don't hold your board on the trucks, man. Like, if you do that, that's not right, Holmes. Like, you need to stop for some reason. And I don't know why. So, but I appreciate what you're saying, that the only way that anyone can move forward and that anything can move forward and evolve is through that open-mindedness. And I think something that Tom was talking to me about earlier when we were deciding these questions was the amount of hate that you get and the amount of, the internet puts on you, and the amount of people that come at you with anger. And to me, I almost go, you're in a community that is literally about mindfulness and peace and mental prosperity and awareness and all this kind of stuff. And I struggle to feel sorry for those people that are treating you in that way, when, like you said, that community sense of openness and evolution is what it should be. And what I want to pose is, how do you feel now that the internet exists and these people have a voice and the negativity is free to be read by everyone, as opposed to, back in the day in the 90s when even I was growing up and Facebook wasn't even a thing, and you didn't have this, you couldn't contact someone who you long lost at high school because it just doesn't, like, you write them a letter and then you lose contact and they disappear into life and that's it. So how do you feel about all of that negativity that's swirling around within the community that you love so much?
Yeah, so the internet has amplified both the negativity and the positivity, right? And I'm not sure it's amplified one or the other more, but certainly it's ramped both up, by many orders of magnitude. And so it is true that it is predictably disappointing how many flame wars and hate posts and all of that get directed not only at me, but tons of people who do this. Like, so I'm, obviously tons of meditation teachers have their own perspective, tradition they're coming from, points of view, ways in which they disagree with somebody's orthodoxy. And so anybody who's public these days, I mean, heck, any subject in the world that has, controversial opinions now, if you post one view, somebody else is going to post the other one, because that's just the web, that's just the world, right? So it's nothing unique or special to me. It's just the planet we're living on. And, you know, you could, as a funny comedian I was listening to said, you know, someone posted a video of their gerbil eating popcorn or something, and people were just like trashing it. And it's like, you know, it's ridiculous, like the things that people will get all excited and angry about. But it's also true that we have a lot of people who, on the one hand, have tremendous appreciation for their tradition, their orthodoxies, their teachers, their points of view, etc. And I can appreciate that. And this sort of notion of what's pure and what's original and what's authentic and what's highest and truest and best, I can very much appreciate that people have, you know, an appreciation for those kinds of aspects of the world. Yet the shadow side of all of those is instantly hatred for anything that isn't, in their view, the highest and best and purest and oldest and most authentic and all of that stuff. And that's just the nature of people in the zealous phase of development. And I've been through plenty of zealous phases of development, so I can totally both sympathize and empathize with them and know where they're coming from. You know, it's part of the dance and the deal and the conversation. And so I think it's important to have all of those voices for us all to get our rough edges a little bit worn down by the interaction with the sharp diamonds out there in the world that are helping to polish all of us. And yet at other times, it is pretty fucking annoying. Like, so that's the other point of view on it that is also very human.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Dude, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, we already as a small podcast get our fair share of people commenting shit and saying stuff, and you know, and when I started reading through some of this subreddit today that Tom posted, I was like, Jesus Christ, like this is like we don't even get half of this, like we're not getting a quarter of this shit right now. And so I appreciate your resilience to the craft and your commitment to wanting to help the people that want your help. And I think that's something that I really, really take my hat off to you with, Daniel. And
Nice.
It's really cool that you're doing that. I think, because, you know, it's easy for someone to be like, cool, you don't like what I got? Fuck you. I'm going for I'll leave the internet. And then you can struggle by yourself. Goodbye. Like, and you can, and do you know what? You're well within your right to do that, to enjoy your acres of wood behind you and your, you know, your house and your land, and live a peaceful life where you don't have to worry about some Billy Bob, you know, Jacobson 202 on Reddit saying, fuck you, Daniel Ingram, you know. And so I respect you very much for that.
Yeah, and it's also worth knowing, shit posters out there, like I have 10 friends who have super deep practices and wisdom to share who are not public about it to every one that is. Actually, the ratio is probably substantially higher than that. And so, and it is exactly the kind of disgust with that world that keeps these people with super deep practices and very interesting wisdom and a lot of diversity of perspectives, some of which some of the shit posters might appreciate. And some of them obviously wouldn't, because they are obviously not a homogenous bunch. And so it is that toxic culture that does keep a lot of people, you know, very much closeted, and that does the world a profound disservice. So just realize the culture you create also creates the dearth of good information that a lot of you decry. So just keep that in mind.
That's a sick quote right there. If anyone wants to take a quote and put that for Daniel Ingram's like next autobiography, I think that's a great one right there. Something else that I also really related to when you're talking then was, you know, in martial arts, it was the same thing. Everything was traditional, like my style is better, like, and now it's very much, that's why mixed martial arts took hundreds of years to appear, because everyone was like, you know, my kung fu style beats your jujitsu style, and you're like, what if I did kung fu and jujitsu? Then I'd be both of you idiots. Like, so I think it's you know, it's very interesting in your point as well that, you know, there's the whole, and I also agree with you. There's the honor in like, oh, my sensei taught me this, and I respect my sensei, like, you know, kind of thing. And I get that, dude. And same with, and meditation is another one of those spiritual arts like martial arts where you respect your leaders in a different way because you see them in a different capacity. So I totally get that as well. Like that makes perfect sense. Tom, do you have another question for Daniel?
I do have another one. So are you ready to take this in an entirely different direction,
Yeah,
Daniel?
wherever we want to go,
Let's go. All right.
surf that
So
wave.
there have been times where we have leaked into and then pulled away from conversations about conspiracy theories. So I'm going to give you a choice of which of which. Now I know we've talked about Tower 7 a little bit, and you've got some really, really good, some pretty
Yeah.
amazing perspective on that puts a lot of question into people's minds. So it could be that, or or it could be anything else. But I'm going to hand it over to you on as far as which conspiracy theory do you feel is less conspiracy theory and more, hey, let's take a real hard look at this because there is something there.
Wow. Yeah. So speaking of getting shit posters and hate mail,
Yeah.
right? As if we didn't have enough of that, but whatever. Fuck it. So I actually, given the number of people that are dying now, so I mean, the whole 9/11 thing is fascinating and could be a long conversation. It could be a lot of fun, and I have a lot of strong opinions on, for better or for worse. But given that in the world we're having more than a 9/11 worth of people die every single day, I'm going to swing it around to coronavirus. Not that hasn't been beat to death, but it's still actively killing people. So it hasn't been beat to death enough from my sort of stomp it out point of view. The one thing I'm going to say about that a lot of people think is going to be really controversial, I think, and is I've as an epidemiologist, so I have an MSPH in epidemiology 2-year from a top public health school and an MD, and my father's an infectious disease pediatric expert, and that's what I grew up with. So I actually grew up, reading the pediatric red book, which is a cool book of pediatric infectious disease. It's actually a fascinating read because it goes into history and stuff. But basically that the sort of first world, and I've already pissed some people off by even using that term, but the rich developed countries are just going to have to get it together and vaccinate the whole world, right? To get rid of coronavirus. And we're going to have to develop vaccines fast. And the anti-vax movement is just going to kill thousands and thousands and thousands of people, period. Right? I'm hawkish on this, and this is going to freak some people out, and some of my friends on the cosmic right and the cosmic left, and fuck that. Like, literally, your views are going to kill staggering numbers of people and disrupt economies for long periods of time. And while they might, save the planet a little bit of carbon emissions, which is valid and important, that's a whole nother topic we need to get into, by how long it's going to be before we resume normal air flight travel and all of that stuff, and driving and tourism. Which again is a sort of a valid benefit in some totally horrible way to coronavirus death and disruption. That said, until we just take this seriously, like smallpox or polio, and vaccinate basically everybody as fast as we can to every new strain that comes out and aggressively quarantine, we're just going to be dealing with this thing. And it seems to be getting more virulent, which is the scary thing. I mean, some of these new variants seem even worse than the previous one, and that's not a good sign. And RNA viruses mutate fast. This is going to be a real challenge. But I think we just need to spend globally the 10 or 20 trillion bucks or whatever this is going to cost, employ as many people as we possibly can. That will boost economic stuff and just shut this shit down. So I'm a total hawk when it comes to this, and that's got to be hopefully controversial enough to spark some good discussion.
Nice.
Tom, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I'm actually right there with you, Daniel. So I don't have a counterpoint, and what I will do is I'll bring it back to just an example that's a real example, which is my mom. So my mom lives in America. She lives in Las Vegas, and she's 80 years old, and we've had conversations about the vaccine. And she, through whatever conversation she's had outside of ours, hears things about, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? I don't know the side effects. And I keep circling back to Mom. It's a real easy proposition. Do you like your chances on the side effects of the vaccine more or less than your chances out in the wild without the vaccine? That's it. Decide one way or the other. And, for those people that have reservations about the vaccine, okay, well, there might be some stuff there to talk about. Who knows? I don't know. But the alternative is infinitely at this point worse, which is not just for you, but every person that you encounter. And that's the thing that I have the biggest fucking problem with, is people that say, well, I'm okay, I'm strong, I'm young, I'll take on Corona, that's fine. That's cool for you, bro. But when you're out there, you're putting other people at risk. So when I wore a mask, literally when we left the last retreat, Tracy and I went to it's kind of like a hardware store, and we bought 5 boxes of N95 masks, and we wore them starting in like March 5th, to the stares and the chagrin and the whispers of loads of people. And my perspective was, that's fine that you're judging me, but actually I almost feel like you should be thanking me. Like, dude, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you. And that's the bit that...
And the community and health systems.
Exactly. So I'm with you, dude. I'm 100% with you. No, I have no counter to that. Boats, you got anything, or you want to go to Tower 7?
Honestly, my honest answer is I fall with both of you in of I feel the same way. Now, I stand with Tom on the frustration at other people for not looking out for your fellow human, because like, dude, I don't wear a mask for me, like, just so and all my friends know this. Like, I have my friends, and I have my 2 best friends. I will call them out on stream. My 2 best friends do not take care in this way in any way, shape, or form. One of them actually has had parties and all that kind of stuff, and is one of those, and is very nonchalant. But they know when I'm with them, I wear a mask, I stand away from them, and I'm happy to spend time with you, but we're going to be as far away from each other as I can get, and I'm definitely going to be wearing a mask. And it's not for me, it's for you guys, just in case I have it, and I don't want to give it to you guys, because that's not going to sit well on my conscience. It's got nothing to do with what happens to me. That doesn't sit well on my conscience. Now, the other thing that I would say, that I agree with you, Daniel, about anti-vaxxing is, guys, and Daniel, I'm sure you can maybe give me closer numbers. I'm not going to say any numbers, because I am in no way an epidemiologist or someone who knows about vaccines or medical stuff. But I will tell you a straight fact. If you were born between like the early 90s and the early 2000s, you were vaccinated for stuff. That's what's up. Like, you were vaccinated for polio, for, a bunch, like, every child got loads of jabs. And guess what? If you are okay right now, then guess what? The COVID jab is fine. And for even further than that, if you have ever traveled outside of your country and gone to a different country, specifically, we're talking Asia, the Middle East, Africa, South America, places like that. If you've traveled there, you have been vaccinated for something in those countries. And if you've received one of those vaccines and you are fine and you enjoyed your holiday and you came back and you work and everything's fine, and guess what? COVID vaccine is fine for you. Like, you have to relate it to things that have happened in your life already. If you're struggling to believe the science and you're struggling to believe the media or whatever, please think about things that have happened in your own life already that you can base off of evidence within your own life. If you are a child that was born between the 90s and the early 2000s, you were vaccinated. Not to mention a lot of people earlier than that as well. You were definitely vaccinated. And if you're fine now, then any COVID vaccine you receive, you will be fine from. Like, that's just it. And like Daniel said, you're putting other people at risk. Now, whether or not, I stand on the side of every person, like, I stand on the side of, I feel like every person should get the vaccine. Now, whether I feel we should inhibit freedom of choice is a whole nother conversation that I really struggle with, because I feel like in my head, I go, yes, military, everyone get a vaccine, like, line the fuck up and let's get this fucking done. But also I go, a lot of the white Western world at this point in our progression will not stand for that. And rebellions will break out. Like the fact that we have had anti-lockdown protests in the UK with thousands, tens of thousands of people in London while this is going on is crazy to me. So we're not even putting harsh restrictions in terms of making sure that you are actually locking down, because in the UK it's locked down, but people don't. And then not to mention there's no like ordered or compulsory vaccination thing. So at this point, I think it would kick up a hell of a fuss if we did try and militarize and get everyone vaccinated across the planet really quickly. But I stand on the side of fuck you. You shouldn't have a choice. Other people's lives matter than your opinion. So fuck you is kind of where I stand on that. But also, you know, you can play with other people's lives. That's not up to you. So that's where I stand on it. But yeah, go for it, Daniel.
I should add a qualifier. I am all for a nuanced, sophisticated, data-driven debate about which vaccines, how many doses, for whom, in what order, like, you know, prioritizing and all of that stuff, right? And so it's not like I don't appreciate that there is nuance to this and subtlety. You know, I spend some of my time listening to, you know, virologists, you know, going into all kinds of excruciating detail about variants and, you know, the degree to which these may or may not apply. And does this really help prevent long COVID? And are people who are vaccinated just as good transmitters, even if they don't have as many symptoms as other people? I mean, there is a lot of nuance and complexity to this. So I don't want in my hawkishness to give the impression that I don't think there isn't a lot of room for reasoned, data-driven, intelligent, scientifically based debate, because there still is. There still is a pretty large amount we don't know about the long-term efficacy of these vaccines and their other impact, and again, things like long COVID and all of that, and how these will relate to different strains, and should we have, you know, like quadrivalent vaccines that protect against multiple strains, and how will that work, and are people going to need to get boosters, and all of those things. There's room for intelligent conversation within my hawkishness, but the basic point is that we need to globally figure out how to shut this shit down. That I'm super hawkish about, just to add some qualifiers.
And I second that as well. 100% second that. Like, we need to be testing every strain of the vaccine. We need to be doing thorough testing, and by that I mean going to corporations. I look at you. Don't be rushing these out because you want money. Like, I would rather you test it for a little bit longer and give us the guaranteed good stuff, rather than chucking me a half-ass vaccine, I guess. So, you know, I also stand very much on that as well. There needs to be debate. We need to be talking about what's right for certain people, and also what vaccines work for certain age groups. You know, I know in the UK we're looking at, you know, the Pfizer one isn't working for some of the variants, but the AstraZeneca one is working for people between, you know, X and X ages, you know, and it's so, yeah, I fully agree with you. It's not black and white, but the answer is, if your question is whether you should or shouldn't, that is very black and white. The other stuff around that is not black and white, though. I fully agree with you.
This actually leads nicely to another question that, I think it's probably appropriate. So this person said, I want to ask Daniel to comment on whether he thinks magical thinking actually hurts people. So for example, some people use magical thinking in traditional medicine to cure COVID. Authoritative voices that promote the idea of magic might be contributing to this misinformation. So I know you have a special place in your heart for that. And
for that debate and discussion.
Yeah. So go for it.
Well, okay. So as people who know my stuff probably know, and for those of you who don't know me, I practice magic. I have wands and robes and crystals and incense and, you know, sigils and all kinds of intuitive stuff, and go on whole meditation retreats to get my concentration powerful enough to deal with entities and travel out of body and blah, blah, the whole friggin' thing, right? And I incorporate magical stuff into plenty of what I do. And I also incorporate a ton of common sense and science-based stuff, right? I'm a doctor, right? Like, you know, and so if I had COVID, I would definitely be doing magical spells and taking my vitamin D and probably some vitamin C and zinc, though there's debates about whether or not they really work and how much and all of that stuff, you know, and would think about other things that might be of value, that, you know, whatever herbal thing my friends have sent me from some fancy tea from Thailand that they think has some, you know, isoflavone, whatever, that does some immune modulating, I don't know, cutting edge or alternative, I'm not sure, right? And by the way, I would be monitoring my pulse ox and staying away from people and getting help if I needed it, and definitely getting steroids if I got sick, and, you know, whatever else the mainstream providers, if I started to need hospital related care, wanted to do, and fluids if I needed them for diarrhea or hydration or whatever it is, or a ventilator. Like, you know, if I needed that level of support, I would seriously think about, you know, it's complicated. But so there is a way to have both in a way that is helpful and complementary rather than contradictory. And so as a pragmatist that cares about good outcomes, like people not dying because they were idiots and stuff, sorry, I'm being a little bit harsh, right? That hopefully is part of the basis of magic as well. And so just me personally, and obviously everybody's going to make their own decisions of this, I tend to press my magical work on all fronts. So I consider magic like it's just integrated into everything else as one more thing I'm doing. It's not an either or, it's an and how do they work together? And so that's my sort of general take on that. But it is definitely true that a whole lot of people have died and are going to die by magical thinking that doesn't have some sort of reasonable pragmatism or basis in data or something. And that's unfortunate. It is also probably true that some of magical thinking and alternative practices have helped people. Almost certainly, yes. And so the problem is we also don't have great data on that. And me as a scientist would love to see the outright comparison of whatever alternative or magical-based treatment modality you have. I would love to have the money to study that and compare it to whatever traditional care and or them together and or whatever, and just see what the actual numbers say. And then hopefully we can all make informed decisions about our magical and medical practices.
Amazing. Absolutely incredible. Do you know what? I want to ask you more of a question on your magical stuff, but I'll address the whole COVID thing first. I think for me, as someone who I guess my mom Tracy is very like outright. She kind of says it as it is, and for many years of her life was strong atheist. Didn't really believe in like herbalism or like holistic, all that kind of stuff. And for me as a young man, it was kind of drummed into me that a lot of that is hokum. And it's super interesting that you say that, because the one thing that I found over this COVID time, like when I'm really feeling good during lockdowns and whatnot, is when I'm taking my vitamins that I've begun taking since COVID. I've begun taking my vitamins. I've begun taking time to myself. Days when, like you said earlier, you exercise early in the morning and get out there, get that serotonin, that dopamine hit from exercising and whatnot. And I think, to me, something that I read in, God, I hate to admit this, read in a Dan Brown book once, is a really, really beautiful thing that science and magic and this whole like Rosicrucian,
Rosicrucian?
Sorry, Rosicrucian, my apologies. And all those guys, and like all their like mode of thinking was that magic and science have always been one, and what's happened is that over time they've kind of torn apart, and people are claiming that they're different entities, but really they still sit very much within each other. And there a lot of magic proves science, and a lot of science proves magic is what seems to come away from a lot of that. The question I actually wanted to ask you is, do you define as a right? Okay, so there's loads of areas within magic and spell casting, and are you wizard, mage, sorcerer, warlock, like monk, what kind of, because obviously each one then defines to different areas within magic and whatnot. So do you define yourself as one of those specifically, or is it just magical being in general?
Yeah, so I draw from a lot of magical traditions that might use various terms like that, and so I'm definitely terminologically flexible when it comes to that, and I actually use different designations depending on context and audience, and almost sort of the type of magic I'm thinking about. right? So I think of sorcery, the term, when I'm doing the sort of weirder, scarier stuff, or like, and wizard is kind of the fun one. And then mage has this sort of, combined notion for me of sort of wisdom and power molded into one. And so I actually love playing around with the language, and I definitely have a basket of terms I choose from, all of which seem to have subtly different implications to my ear. But yeah, I like having fun with the language as much as anything.
That's awesome. No, that's super cool.
One thing I wanted to add, actually, I have this weird hypothesis that is not data driven, but I would love to test it, that the inflammatory cascade, the sort of immunological storm that COVID has, I actually have this weird notion it might respond quite well to deep jhana. I have this curious hypothesis that the ability to attain to extremely profoundly calm states might do something really nicely immunomodulatory to the immune system. And it's something I don't have data on, but it's a hypothesis that has many, many times come up in my brain. Is if I got COVID, what would I be doing? I would be doing a whole lot of deep shamatha to calm that system down, because it is an overstressed, overactive, anxious immune system that seems to actually do a lot of the serious damage that kills people. The secondary infections and blood clots. Okay, yeah, that's part of it. But even the blood clots and things are related in some ways to an inflammation of the clotting cascade, which is from the whole system just being too agitated, as far as I can tell. And it would be fascinating to know what the heavy parasympathetic tone and vagal stuff did in terms of neuroimmunomodulation to make it less likely that I would die of COVID. And I've many times thought, if I got that positive test, I'm going to be like full on in shamatha retreat mode until the thing passes.
Wow. What I loved about what you said, which it moved it from an either or, which is this blend of magical aspiration or application along with science. And I didn't think of it that way. I didn't think of them being complementary or one enhancing the other. So that it was illuminating for me, for sure. So during these times, anything magical that you are thinking about or ritualistically doing for either the benefit of yourself or beyond yourself with regard to COVID?
Yeah, so this may not seem like a magical act, but I very much think of it as like just reaching out to supportive people. Like the magic of community has been so critically important. That's not a profound thing to say, but I think it actually is a really profound thing to say. Did that make any sense? Okay.
Yeah, totally.
So, anyway, and then the next thing I'm doing is a ton of just general blessings. Like I like to spend time out on my breezeway and over my garden, just hands up, heart open, sending love and well-wishing out to the world, the classes of beings and elements and dimensions and all of that, which sounds totally new age hokey, but it's just tremendous fun. And that sense of sort of open-hearted well-wishing, I think, counters a lot of the sense of sort of closedness or isolation or restriction or anger or frustration, whatever it is, like all the stuff that's very like, right? Because COVID has had this serious constrictive energy. And so very, very actively doing open-hearted practices where it's like, no, as far out and pushing through all barriers and resistances and just sending just blessings and well-wishing to everything and anything, and feeling that out as an active practice, I think has been really helpful. And then I've done some active defense stuff, like old school, like banishings of unskillful energies and property boundary defense, which is sort of the other side of it, right? So like not so open-hearted as to let any crazy thing in, right? So you gotta, I tend to like both having open-heartedness and boundaries. I think that's just reasonable from a magical point of view. And so also I've done like, active perimeter defense of, protect home and protect family and stuff from bad things related to this. And so that's just sort of a start to the magical work. How about all of you? What have you been doing? Anything active, interesting, something subconscious or formal?
Great question. Great fucking question.
Do you have anything?
I have a little bit.
Buy me some time.
I would say I haven't again, the magic, and I said this in our last podcast, magic is very absent in my life, or I feel like it's very absent in my life. And
That
me of
fucking
all
sucks.
people, yeah, I
God
know, right?
bless. That's phew.
Yeah, it's pretty wacky, and again, as someone who currently at the moment, like just for people like me and Tom are working on tabletop gaming, specifically Dungeons and Dragons, I have been spending my entire days writing a world and creating a place filled with magic and beautiful like abilities and stuff like that. So man, of all the people in this world, I want magic more than anything, and I want to be able to feel it and experience it and believe and be in that headspace. But something really inhibits me, and I don't know what it is. But countering that, I will say I've had a couple of amazing moments during lockdown, moments where I've been in bed and I've been like not wishing for something, but just being like just talking to, I don't know whether it's myself or, and it's not God. It's not. I'm talking to
Fair.
something. I'm talking to the energy of the universe. I guess I'm talking to, in my opinion, the particles that make life, and just being like, yo, like I need some courage right now, or I need some like something or other. And waking up the next day and being like, wow, I feel better. And so I would say there's been one or two moments of that, as well as also one or two moments of, you talked about community magic, like with my significant other, Nikki, because we've been living in one apartment together, tight, compact for months, a year now. It's there's been beauty in our communication. There's been beauty in and magic in the emotions that we've shared during this time we've been trapped together. There's been magic in and both good and bad, crying together, laughing together, loving one another, hating each other in the same space, and all of it. And I think that's been pretty magical for me. Has been the experience I've had with my significant other has been the most magical thing I've experienced during the last year of COVID.
That is
So,
awesome to hear. Yeah, she's really cool. Yeah, Carol and I actually have never been closer in the last 18 years than we've been this at the end of this last year. It's also been quite a cool and remarkable journey. So yeah, I can really appreciate that. That's awesome. Nice.
Yeah.
I
What about
would
you,
say,
Tom?
yeah, so I've got something else, but I would just on the back of that say that same thing with Tracy and I guess it's a very going to go one way or another in COVID, right? It's either going to accentuate some real problems and make those bigger, or it's going to allow you to kind of come together, to ally together, and to appreciate each other in a different way, in a really, really stripped down, simple way. This is not about going out for dinners. This is not about for outside entertainment or distraction. This is about just you, and day after day after day of waking up, groundhog daying that over and over and over again. Can you do that? And by the way, can you do that and be happy? Like that is pretty cool if you can, right? And then coming out of this, like I don't even know what coming out of this means, but I am very much looking forward to stepping out into the world again after having this time. This has been a really special time for us. So very much um, have savored that time. So the other thing I would say though as well. Now I'm not sure. I think this is magical space, and I'm going to take it to this podcast. We have really, really tried. Uh, I guess it's part of it's been luck with our guests, but certainly part of it has been our method of really keeping in a positive, open, positive, complementary, um, inspiring space, right? And whether it's about something that someone does, something that someone is talking about, we continually try to keep that space in the forefront of what we're doing. And so that's been really, really fun for us. And I think it's been something that we haven't even talked about, both. It's not been a strategy. It's not been something that we have looked at and said to ourselves, oh, we're gonna have this theme. It's just been sort of this organic approach to everything. So that has been really feels like that little magical space has been in that positivity. It just makes it makes me feel good, and I know that our guests come away, even if it's for a short period of time, saying that was cool. I really enjoyed that. like that little period of time, whatever we talked about, that energy was kind of cool. And that's been hugely rewarding for us, certainly in that capacity.
Nice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Super
go ahead.
interesting, Tom. Now, can I ask ask you a question now, and kind of with Daniel as well. Now, where does the magic and reward or like, do we consider something's magical because it's not likely to happen and it happens and we're like, shit, that was unbelievable? Or is it that we achieve something and what we think is magic is actually just hard work and hustle and grind and time? And like, even with you, Daniel, casting a spell, is what happens afterward magic? Or is it that you spent a day, being like, I'm sending out blessings, people, like, what's up? Like, I'm here kind of thing. And like, is it almost like, I'm almost wondering, is it that hormone like kick of being like, I did something, or is it the like actual result of what happens?
Yeah,
over to you, Daniel.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I think magic is not only a practice, but it's also an attitude, but it's also a worldview. So for example, before this podcast, I was reviewing the bylaws for Emergent Benefactors, the charity I'm creating to help support the EPRC, my international research consortium project that I'm doing with all these cool people and friends, all of us together. And the bylaws are part of the spell of how you cast a not-for-profit corporation. Like, those are the words you use to cast one, right? And so I think of that as like, that's the spell book. It's writing the spell book of what we're going to do and how we're going to govern ourselves and how our conflict of interest spell and our whistleblower spell, like the policies and procedures and the legal voting things and all of that is the spell of how you create a nonprofit, right? And so I think of it all as the same. Like, there's no difference to me or boundaries. I'm just casting all day long in various forms, and sometimes it looks like this, and sometimes it looks like that, and sometimes it has wands, and sometimes it's Word documents and stuff. And sometimes it's phone calls to lawyers, and sometimes it's sending money, and sometimes it's doing whatever it's doing or meeting with friends. That's all part of the spell. So I look at it as a grand casting that encompasses everything, and I just proceed on all fronts. And it's certainly the results of magic are interesting, and they can definitely give some people tremendous faith that a magical attitude might have some value in the mix. But also, I think our subconscious aspects respond very well to ritual. This is not a profound statement. The vast majority of cultures and religions know this. That's why they do it. But I think for people who have lost the sense of ritual or prayer, as you mentioned, just reconnecting with the degree to which our subconscious minds appreciate that. And there are deep aspects of ourselves that think that way and respond very healthily to that kind of thinking sometimes, if we can use it skillfully and not unskillfully. That in and of itself is powerful brain hacking tech that is old and well established and hence so popular.
Nice. I love that term, brain hacking tech. That's awesome. Daniel, just kind of based off of you said, I would love to see, if this deep jhana work assists with COVID. We actually have a question from someone in the Reddit forum that basically says, I would love to hear Daniel's take on light jhana versus heavy jhana debate. And do they both count as jhana, or should they have a specific standard?
Wow. Okay. So back to another question. All right. I think that, okay, so I can both appreciate dimensional thinking where you're sort of shades of gray of how much is one factor or another factor present and in what combinations. And I can also think where you weren't in jhana and then you shift and all of a sudden you are. And wherever you want to draw that line, there's an obvious demarcation, both temporally and experientially, of sort of a quantum shift, like, okay, this is really concentrated in a way a few seconds ago definitely wasn't, or this suddenly just dropped some factor that had been so powerfully prominent until seconds ago. And then at the end of the out breath, there's the shift. And all of a sudden you're in an entirely new space, attention shape, degree to which things are included and excluded. And so I'm very comfortable in both of those types of language, but being a pragmatist rather than, trying to be some asshole of orthodoxy. Oops, did I say that? Sorry, a little bit of bleed through. I consider that people need to figure out which language is working for them now and helping them do something useful. And there are definitely practitioners that one or the other is going to be better for. And I can very much appreciate the high standards of people saying, it's not until your body is gone and you had no thoughts and nothing but a bright light, pervading your entire experience for 4 hours or whatever is the first jhana, but for most people, that's just fuckery, right? Just to be straight up emotionally honest. But there are practitioners for whom that's a totally reasonable thing to be talking about because it makes sense to them, as within their reasonable, could attain that, have attained that, can do stuff like that, and then, so I think it's really important to sort of match the language and the conceptual frame and the rigidity with which you apply various criteria to something that actually makes sense for you that day or as a practitioner. And both are kind of useful in various contexts. Is that helpful?
I hope so. Do you know what? I would love if you could just explain, just for people like myself. I've actually spoken to Tom, so I know a little bit more about this. But could you explain what a jhana is, just for people who might not have done any meditation practice or very little and might not have reached the stage within their practice?
Sure. Okay. So this is traditional Theravadan terminology that actually clearly is pre-Buddhist, and also under the term dhyana occurs in multiple Hindu traditions. And then the word gets used differently with kind of different criteria and implications. In the Zen people almost never talk about it. The Tibetans talk about it, but they talk about it really differently. And so it's a wild world out there in terms of people how you use this. But I'm going to go back to old school Theravada. This is old school Buddhism, Southeast Asian Buddhism, as some people would call it, or whatever, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, mostly, Cambodia a little bit. And then, so basically it's levels of depths of concentration. So you'd be going along and you can't concentrate on your objects, and you've got a bunch of hindrances of doubt or fear or worry or restlessness of desire or whatever. Okay. And then at some point you get, so you can actually get something called access concentration. Access concentration, variously defined, huge range of possible definitions. I'm just going to go with this one. It's when you can actually stay with your objects and begin to actually access what are called Genic Factors. So Genic Factors are things like bliss and happiness and tranquility and stability of mind and seclusion from the hindrances, right? And the ability to apply and sustain attention on an object. So this is the first jhana definition, actually, is it has applied and sustained attention. Vitaka and vichara, you can stay with your object. You're secluded from the hindrances, meaning all these like thoughts that were knocking you off your game, or feelings or whatever, not a problem now. You can stay with the breath. You can go up with the breath. You can go down with the breath, or your mantra, or your visualization, or whatever the hell it is you're using as your concentration object. There's tons of them, but, and you're able to do that. Like here, I'm able to stay on the object. I'm able to stay on the object. I am secluded from the hindrances. They are not bothering me. With effort, I can just stay on it, like I would keep my hand on a moving thing or whatever, or, keep my mind on my feet if I'm skateboarding. That and this can feel very much like kind of like a flow state to some people. Is all kind of, flow states and how they relate to jhana is a whole nother topic. But the sense of like, I can actually do this. I can concentrate. I am able to stay with things and it feels good. Then with the dropping of that sense of effortfulness of having to like monitor and stay on an object with attention, that drops away. And all of a sudden, second jhana is like, you're able to stay with objects very naturally, and the mind is clear and bright and just naturally attentive. And the bliss for some people can get much stronger. It really depends on the degree to which you're incorporating bodily objects into your practice. If you're, people who are not incorporating as much bodily stuff may not notice as much bliss. It varies. It's a whole huge topic. There's a lot of variability and possible objects and stuff and variance. But then with the dropping of the sense of like heavy rapture and really, really good feelings, suddenly then there's this wide open, cool, sort of tranquil bliss. And with the dropping of that, there's just this vast sort of open, flowy, or very silent or still equanimity, which can become progressively more formless. And then what's the correlation between the four formless realms of boundless space, boundless consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor yet non-perception? Are those realms, or are those actually the 5th through 8th jhanas? Again, there's scholarly debate, that's fine. But then, so progressively refined states of meditative concentration and remove, basically, it's almost a subtractive process. You're subtracting hindrances and subtracting heady bliss and effort, and subtracting cool bliss, and subtracting even equanimity and body, and then subtracting form. And then you get into more and more refined, finely abstracted states. So that would be sort of traditional what jhanas are in a nutshell. Well, maybe a long nutshell.
Oh, no, absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. Tom, go for it.
Yeah, so you talked about the out-breath with regard to jhana, and you and I have talked about the out-breath a little bit as well, and almost to the point where I forget how we were in Arizona sitting on a back porch, and we were talking about, I think at that point we're talking about getting to stream entry and that out-breath really being important. And it was almost like it was a secret weapon, really, really just concentrate on the out-breath. And that has been hugely, hugely valuable for me. It's almost like
nice.
The out-breath is almost like connective tissue to keep you from, to actually allow those integrated parts to stabilize, to stay stable, and then to build more integration, more ability to expand your consciousness, your attention. And so that out-breath has been a very important part to it's almost like a bridge, right? And without concentration on the out-breath, you can find yourself continually losing integration, continually losing attention. So can you talk about that a little bit? I don't know if it was I'm thinking that it was a publicly shared thing, but talk about the out-breath as a secret weapon.
Yeah, so that's actually where a lot of people space out. So our mind kind of detunes from the out-breath, because actually in some ways the out-breath is like a series of gateways or doorways or portals that you can jump through almost if you're in the right state and setup. And the vast majority of significant state shifts where you're in one state of mind and then you suddenly shift to the other happen at the end of the out breath. There are a few that can happen at the top of the breath as well when it stops on the end of the in breath. So, okay, fine. But the majority happen, you drop, you're in one state, you drop down, out breath going down, and then all of a sudden it starts coming up and you come into a new space. And there just seems to be something essentially physiological about the mind of that as an easy phase of whatever brain waves and experience and God knows what of some deep structure and how it relates to consciousness and probably reticular activating system. And I don't know, I'm just sort of making up bullshit neurological stuff at this point, but something, right? As everybody who's noticed this, like there's something about the end of the out breath that not only is it a common place for people to space out. So if you're attuned to that, you can anticipate that and not space out on it. But also somewhere down there are these shifts that can take place where all of a sudden from 1 second to the next, from one out breath to the next coming in breath, you're suddenly in two very different mental spaces. And the second one is somehow better generally. There are exceptions. And so, or farther down some progression, even though it may not necessarily be as pleasant as the previous one. And so being able to attend to the end of the out-breath, as lots of people like Shinzen Young and people, mention all the time, this is a really good thing to be able to do. And definitely one of these sort of one weird trick that'll make your meditation better. This is one of them.
Yeah. And,
do you know what? It's super interesting you mentioned the out-breath, because there's so many aspects in life where that out-breath, like one that I thought of is like riflers or archers when they're in mad competition. They go on the out breath because it is the moment when you are most still. Everything in your body, is at its most still. Even your pulse slows and everything. So what I wanted to maybe theorize off of what you said is there's a chance that maybe even that out breath, the reason that there's so much peace and calmness there is because it's the closest thing to, excuse my bleakness, death. It's the closest thing to that infinite blackness and nothingness that is what we consider the human peace zone. It's very interesting that it's one of the few places in life that we get to on that out breath, at the end of that out breath, where you are as close to being dead without being warm and having blood pumping around you as you possibly can be. And I wonder if, and you said you feel different on that in-breath, and it's almost like that rejuvenation of life, you know, it comes back in you and you're like the thing that keeps me alive is the air and I'm back, you know, and so I wonder if it's because of that whole like life and death kind of space that humans get into when breath is within the lungs and when breath is without the lungs.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely extremely liminal, on the boundary of. It's a place where the mind seems to be more loosely put together in some way and is able to more easily reconfigure into totally different modes of being. And so it's almost like the reset button on a computer, or you know, it's a place where all of a sudden the train tracks can diverge. It's a junction point. It's, yeah, like a portal, a multifaceted portal where you can go a lot of different directions. Yeah, it's definitely an important trick.
Yeah, and I think there's different elements to it. So it is that that portal, which can take you to different places. But if you can stay with it and stay connected to it, it allows you to not get distracted or almost like reset back to where you were. You know, you can have this sort of almost like reset cycle that, you know, when you get to the out breath, you forget that whatever you had integrated in the previous cycle is gone, and you're trying to find it again, and here you are back again. If you can just stay with it, it can start building. It can start kind of establishing a foundation of awareness, of consciousness. Each breath starts building on itself. And the other thing that's really important, sometimes it's scary. Like if you get real quiet down there, you get real to the end of that out breath and not a lot's going on. You're right, Bodhi. That's like the abyss down in there. Like, you know, and sometimes you almost pull back sometimes and you're like, whoa, that was real. That was too quiet. I don't know if I'm ready for that one yet.
Yeah.
So
That's an interesting space to get into. Let's talk a little bit about that, because something that, you know, I know I've talked about with Nikki, my girlfriend, and other people is, you know, the negative things that happen when you do start mindfulness and meditation. I won't say negative, but the feelings of like you've said, fear and like doubt and things like that start creeping in, and you start having all these different feelings. Not to mention Tom, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, something for people to understand is Tom's a fully grown man. You know, for him to say that he's afraid of what's at the end of his breath is pretty. It's that's a big, like, that's big. Like you need to, like, that's big universe shit. When you actually think about a fully grown man is going, I'm afraid of what's at the end of my breath. Like that's huge. Like that's a big thing. And me trying to conceptually think about that at the moment is, and it's true. And that's why I was talking about earlier with, you know, you giving the example of myself with my brain being very jumbled. It's in those moments where you are in pitch blackness and you hit the end of that out breath and you're like, Jesus Christ, this is, yeah. And it's fear mixed with so many other things that go on in that moment. But yeah, Tom, like the fact that you said that, I think is awesome, because not many men of our age or your generation are happy to admit that they're afraid of their own bodily functions, which is kind of, you know, kind of interesting. And I think that's pretty awesome that, you know, that one, that you can admit that, and that is a thing that exists, that people can explore that space as well. Because even though it might be scary, sometimes in life the scariest things are the ones where you discover the most or find the most out about yourself and things like that.
it's so true. You just touched on something, Bodes, which is, you know, we there's different aspects of the cycle and of the path, but one of them is about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, getting more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And there's one particular area, it's called reobservation, where there can be times where you cannot even, you don't want to be in your own skin. You want to be somewhere other than where you are, and you'll do anything to do it. I almost picture, you know, and this is a probably pretty crude analogy, but there's stories of during 9/11 with people up on the World Trade Center tower, where they knew that it was really hot in there, and they knew that was bad out there. But at some point they made a snap decision that I just can't be here anymore, so I got to be over there. And there's an aspect of reobservation, which is I don't know what I need to do, but I can't be here anymore. If you can get comfortable with that and curious about it, and it's hard to, but if you can really start understanding the mechanisms, like the motor behind that, that can be hugely powerful in your everyday life, because those things that start crippling you, that start debilitating you in certain situations, pressurized situations, now you're just like looking at it, okay, and you're a little bit more familiar with, okay, this is that bit, this is how it manifests itself inside of me. My chest gets tight. Sometimes I start feeling like my skin is crawly. I just don't want to, my breath sometimes gets more shallow, all of those things. And I can watch it and almost observe it as a third party entity. I can be with it a little bit more. And at some point it starts losing its power. Like it starts becoming defanged. And so that's a huge point. And I know, Daniel, you talk extensively about reobservation and about the challenge, but also the reward in that space. And it's, to me, it's probably the most fruitful space to progress yourself that I've experienced so far.
That's true. Yeah, the deep end of the dark night, while the most challenging, is also the place where the most important growth occurs.
Yeah.
Wow. What a sense.
Not that it has to be hard, but when it is hard, there is still tremendous growth potential there.
What an amazing sentence. What an amazing sentence as well. God,
Thanks.
that warmed me in my soul, that actually a little bit. That was awesome. I felt like you should be narrating a comic book as we like enter like the scene with that line. That was amazing. God.
The deep end of the dark night is where growth happens most.
Something like that. I can't remember it.
Yeah, we can
Luckily, it's on video.
It was so genuine and natural that it just came out beautifully. That's why. Do you know what? And I want to say, well, Tom, you were talking then, I was thinking about philosophy and like life philosophy and stuff. And I wanted to ask, because obviously there's loads of philosophers through history and loads of incredible people who have come up with amazing theories about life and life experience and stuff. How much, Daniel, do you feel like, obviously the religious stuff, there's a lot of crossover with philosophy there, but with core meditation, removing any sort of religious beliefs or things like that, do you feel like the crossover with philosophy is quite hard? Would you even maybe consider yourself a philosopher in some sort of ways?
Oh, I'm extremely philosophical. I'm a huge fan of the whole discipline of philosophy, and spent a reasonable time, and still sometimes do, reading not only religious texts about religious philosophy, but also philosophy in its more secular sense. Not that it often doesn't end up sort of looking like its own religion. It often does. But there are a lot of philosophers I super appreciate. I very much appreciate the Stoics. They can be taken too far, but I think they're just super useful, pragmatic, and just helpful for a lot of things. Their attitudes and specifics can be very applicable. I find David Hume extremely interesting. Just the fact that the immediacy of experience being the first basis, the sort of the British empiricists in general, just top-notch work, I think. And obviously some of the later people who built on them, Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer, very interesting stuff. But I think the discipline of philosophy and just being able to apply the intellect as a powerful and interesting tool, I think philosophy is a great tool, and it's a great servant and a terrible master. So I think it's a very interesting thing to be able to use when it's helpful. But I would not like to be ruled by most of the philosophers I've run into, as I would find every single one of them too limiting and narrow for the grand and amazing thing that life is.
And maybe because not as many of them meditated, interestingly, or maybe because some of them didn't
That's complicated, actually. And the degree to which they were involved in mystery schools or took psychedelics or had powerful mystical experiences. Actually, there's a long history of a lot of the great thinkers, like Rene Descartes being the classic example of a powerful thinker in the West, who also had very powerful experiences that I would map very straightforwardly to arising and passing away, to dark night territory, and sometimes to equanimity. And so I think that there is this weird thing where I'm guessing actually most of the great philosophers had something of the spiritual journey, as I would think of it, happen to them. And there's plenty of evidence for this. Actually, Einstein is another one. And then writers and poets that seem mystical as well as philosophical, like Tolstoy and T.S. Eliot, who describe very powerful mystical experiences, etc. And a lot of the Greeks were seriously involved in mystery school stuff, where we don't know exactly what they were taking, but these people were tripping balls, right? And so, and having some kind of spiritually transformative experience. And so, yeah, I don't think it's so easy to cleanly differentiate these. And my guess is there's more to the story that even a lot of them didn't report, because you see hints of deep wisdom in some of their insights, and you're like, they must have been seeing something, right? It's hard to imagine all of it as purely intellectual.
And do you know what, like, I guess off of that, I wanted to kind of segue into a question about you as a person and your position within this community, and even within your own head about where you are in the community. What responsibility do you feel? Do you carry a weight, if any, on your shoulders about what you're presenting to the community, the philosophical, the mindfulness, the different things that you are putting out into the world that people are now living their lives by? The old man who I know very well being one of them. You know, do you carry that weight? Does that weigh on you, dude? Like how much does that kind of shit bear down on you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, a lot. So there is a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes with all this. And we're all flawed mammals. And that's a super scary thing to think about, that we're all these sort of, you know, we only know what we know. We only can see what we can see. And every single thing you do is going to have good and bad consequences, right? So as soon as you say something is something, you know, there's someone else for whom that might not apply, and you can't always know how things are going to read to any particular audience. And you try to build in safeguards and counterbalancing technology, but people sometimes, you know, just totally miss it, or they misinterpret it. That's that can cause endless chaos. And so I actually, you know, help a number of people a week who have been in some way fried by this stuff, as you know. And even though I build all of these warnings in the first few pages of my book, and they just keep on coming, that said, you know, we all try our best based on what we know, but it's all limited and flawed. And so that, which is why I also refer people to tons of other people's work to try to bring some greater breadth and balance and everything to what I do. And I try to refer people to friend networks who are coming from other perspectives, and refer people to the healthcare industry in situations where I think hopefully the healthcare industry, even as little as it knows about any of this stuff, will hopefully do them some good, and therapy and all of that. And so there is a lot of sense of responsibility. But you know, you can only take that so far, because otherwise there would just be responsibility paralysis, right? Where I have a bunch of friends who the whole thing seems so daunting or overwhelming, or they're too appreciative of what can go wrong, they don't put anything out there. And I think even though they may have some really good stuff to share, if they weren't so afraid. And so trying to balance, yes, the weight of responsibility with the obligation to at least try to further the conversation as best all of us flawed mammals can, realizing it's going to be, you know, as soon as you remember this is from a Buddhist point of view, the realm of samsara ruled by the demon Mara, yeah, it's going to be a shit show, but you can at least try within the context of the shit show to lend something that hopefully will do more good than harm.
Yeah, you know what, that's awesome. And I think, you know, for anyone listening, anyone who disagrees with what Daniel says or anything like that, you know,
put your
I think
own
it's
good
important.
stuff out there. Like, show us how it's done, kids.
Yeah,
you know,
like
if you
100%,
think
like,
we're fucked it up, like, take it to the next level. And you know,
yeah,
I have no problem with that.
100%. And I think, you know, people need to hear that you're a person at the end of the day. You know that what you're doing is carrying weight. You know that you have responsibility within the words that you speak and the actions that you take, both on the internet, both in person and in any other form. So I think it's important for everyone to remember that, you know, we're all just trying to do things. And I think, again, to your point, the courage to say something is a big thing. And I think, you know, you're right in that, yeah, and Tom talks about this all the time. It's one of my favorite things that Tom talks about. He talks about secret, like, professionals or secret geniuses, basically. The people who are, like, unbelievable at something, who maybe never discover that they're unbelievable at it, or find out that they're unbelievable and never present themselves to the world and exist in this, like, solitude of not existing within the planet. And don't get me wrong, there's some beauty and honor to being like, oh, I'm going to accept my piece and I don't need the you know, publication and whatnot. But I also go, there's courage in stepping out and going, hey, this is what I think, and I hope it helps you, because if it does help you, then I've done one thing that I wanted. And if it doesn't help you, then that's fine, and I can recommend someone else, and there is someone else. I promise you there's someone else. But if I help you, then I'm glad that I said that. And I think that's the part that some of the people within life as a whole are missing out on in terms of making a mark in the world on your people, even as far as your social bubble, then even bigger to your community bubble, and even bigger to your state or providence bubble, to your country, to the world. Like, you decide what effect you have on all of that. And I think it takes balls to do what you do, Daniel, in terms of go, hey, this is what I think, and if it helps you, then I can give you some more advice. But otherwise, let's just like, don't worry, move on, kind of thing. I respect the hell out of that.
I think it's a good lead in, Daniel, as well, to your current work, because there seems like there's been chapters to your life, and it seems like this is the beginning of a new chapter. And you talked about the EPRC and the work that you're doing with that, but it's a massive initiative that I know. I guess I'm going to have a hunch here in saying that mastering the core teachings of the Buddha sits very, very sort of prominent on your shelf of accomplishments, but the EPRC perhaps could be your magnus opus if you can really bring into existence what you envision. Then this could be the lasting, really, really impactful initiative that could move a lot of people, change a lot of people, change the world. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the EPRC, or Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, and Emergent's benefactors, the charity we're creating to help fund and support it, is now a 50-something person international multidisciplinary research consortium where we're attempting to bring clinical sensibilities and common sense and phenomenology to the world of spiritual, mystical, magical, energetic, kundalini, awakening, dark night, hero's journey, shamanic, archetypal, whatever experiences you want to call them, to mainstream clinicians, many of which may have never had any of these experiences. But we firmly believe that there's a way to understand more of the underlying physiology of these things, to be able to group them into reasonable diagnostic sort of categories or syndromes, somehow to have some reasonable taxonomy and expansile taxonomy of them, to be able to follow them longitudinally and see what they actually lead to in terms of outcomes, such that providers of healthcare and mental health care and emergency medicine and psychiatry and neurology, et cetera, can relate to these experiences in a much more skillful way that really adds a lot more value to patient care, and such that practitioners and family members of practitioners and friends, et cetera, relating to people who are experiencing either the really good stuff or the really challenging stuff or the weird stuff, can hopefully have more just straightforward information on these human experiences that have been reported, for thousands and thousands of years across traditions, and to be able to bring clinical and scientific and epidemiological and public health, et cetera, sensibilities to these, and be able to give, doctors and nurse practitioners and nurses and therapists and stuff reasonable differential diagnosis, to give them some data on, do they actually need to get the fMRI or the EEG to be able to distinguish them from other conditions like migraines or strokes or seizures or whatever, mental conditions or whatever people are, wondering if they might be something related to, and to understand the role of pharmaceuticals in all of this, the realm and role of different practices, related to all of this, spiritual practices, points of view, paradigms, language, ontologies, all of that, and to be able to have that incorporated into like national, health policy and the DSM-5 and ICD-10 and 11 WHO billing codes. That's the project, and so that's huge. That will take many decades. It will take a huge team. So it's certainly not going to be my magnum opus. It's going to be the magnum opus of an amazingly large team of incredible people who share the vision that this just needs to happen. The 120 years of various people failing to do this is no longer acceptable, that meditation and psychedelics and other spiritual practices and hot yoga and all of these things that can create these kinds of experiences, and sometimes they just rise spontaneously as well and for no obvious reason. There are just too many of these people now, and the healthcare industry has to be empowered and partnered with to figure out language and frameworks and ways that they can help add value to the care and the journey of people who are on this path. Because it's just no longer acceptable that these things be taboo things that you would be scared to tell a healthcare provider about because you would feel they would actively harm you. That's not what they went into healthcare for. That's not what you went to them for. We can do better. And so trying to build on the failed, unfortunately, work of like the transpersonal psychology and psychiatry movement, which has largely failed to penetrate the mainstream, and all the previous work of like Abraham Maslow and William James and people who came before them, and finally get this thing done. It's going to cost tens of to hundreds of millions of dollars, probably hundreds of millions realistically. It's going to take some number of decades, I think, unfortunately, if previous attempts at this are any indication of how hard this is, but it just needs to happen. And luckily there's enough of a groundswell of serious people in serious universities with serious degrees and capabilities and talents and perspectives and resources that hopefully we can get it done this time. And that's what I've dedicated the next few decades of my life, if I'm blessed enough to have that much good health and capability for that long. Or even if I don't, still, if I died tomorrow, I'd still have died feeling like that me and my friends were doing the thing that seriously needed to happen, and that our skill sets and our life experiences and our own journeys really sort of call to us and say, you just need to do this. And so that's the vision. And so if any of you out there, by the way, are interested in helping with this, you have either resources or talents or capabilities or experiences or whatever it is that you think could lend to a project like that, please get in touch with us at info@theeprc.org. That's info@theeprc.org. Thank you so much.
Do you know what? That's absolutely badass, dude. Like, can I ask you a question? Is the image is like what you're picturing in your head a world where both healthcare and the holistic side and the spiritual side and all of that work as one cohesive unit? Sorry, trying to get my words out. Is
or
that
maybe
kind of
complementary units? It will probably end up as something like complementary units, but at least they would know when to refer to each other and have more common language and common understanding and an appreciation of where they all may fit into helping people do better.
Of course, yeah, no. I mean, again, this is the one thing that I come back to is, I struggle to believe the holistic stuff sometimes and that kind of stuff. But I always come back to, if it's something that helps you and you believe in it, then there's no way that I can say, bro, don't do that. Like, there's no way. So I go, yeah, there's definitely room, and it needs to be something where for the people that do follow those kinds of things and do utilize those practices more so than, for example, standard healthcare, or in other cases alongside it, then yeah, they need support in both areas. You're totally right. I think, to anyone listening, one incredible project, big thing, if you do have help, God, please help. Like, that sounds absolutely incredible. What did you want to say, Tom?
Just to make it maybe even more real. So you mentioned earlier, Bodhi, about doing a hallucinogenic and being on that trip and then having an afterglow for 2 or 3 days and then having a crash. There's most people out there don't even understand that is actually a logical, expected outcome. And sometimes you get to that crash and you start unwinding a little bit and being stuck in that place, and just having a little bit more awareness, having some scientific rigor behind information that is accessible to you, even going to your GP and them saying, oh yeah, that's part of the whole process, man, don't worry about it, you don't need any medication, just write it out, you might want to do some breathing exercises, get out there and run a little bit, and that's going to pass. It might be more extreme this time or less extreme this time, but it's completely something to, as a human being, something that we experience. That's not out there at all in any way. And that's why people get stuck in these places, and they start beating themselves up. They start thinking they're not worthy, or they can't cope, and they don't realize that just understanding that that's part of the cycle gets you along the way in the cycle and eventually out of that part of it. Hugely important.
Specifically with drugs as well, what you just mentioned can often lead to addiction. That lack of knowledge of that dark place leading to, oh, I need to go again. Like, that kind of thing. And that cycle, like, that's where that kind of goes without that information, and that's why, like what you said, Tom, and it's my favorite thing on this whole planet is when I inform healthcare professionals that I consume cannabis. It's just the funniest thing ever. I've had nurses be like, oh my goodness, no, you're so young, you must quit now. please, young man, leave this doctor's office with this leaflet that I give you and quit forever. And I'm like, I've also had other amazing doctors that have spoke to me. Like I had one before I had a big, massive cancer surgery. And I had smoked the day of the surgery, and he was like, it's not a problem. We can still put you under. It doesn't affect anything. Actually, I assume it's helping you be more calm. So actually, I'm glad you did so today. And like very different approach from different medical professionals. And like you said, there's no cohesive answer from any of them. You get the spectrum of, oh my God, to, dude, that's totally cool. Like, I don't fucking care. Why did you even tell me? Like, that's cool. Good for you. Like, go enjoy yourself. And then you get the ones that are like, oh, here's some advice. Like, do it, but maybe think about this and think about that. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be more cohesive information and information available to people to be able to answer those questions and to not feel like they're alone in those moments, or being chastised or criticized in those moments either.
Or being told things that seem to be totally crazy or, experientially untrue or whatever. I think a lot of trust is actually broken when we attempt to enforce our paradigms on people when they're having radically different experiences in their own life of the consequences of whatever it is they're doing. You rapidly lose a lot of trust, as you just basically explained, by your impression of the person. And that doesn't help the therapeutic relationship, right? As a care provider, right? So you need to keep all that in mind.
Totally.
I got one that I guess it's a personal question, but it's also something that someone shared as well. So this is something around the consideration of attention-based practices like Vipassana versus awareness-based practices like Mahamudra or Dogen. So is it better, the actual question that was offered up, is it just better for some people to practice one versus the other style, or is there a path to it? First trying to drill down sensation and then let it go when you're near the end of the path. And what's the value of balancing attention and awareness? So in my experience, I feel like I need to incorporate more expansion and more integration of my surroundings a little bit more. I feel like I've really done a fairly, good job of deconstructing my own sensory field, but I need to now kind of bring that out into allowing that all to fit in together and that whole integration to happen. What are your thoughts on, is there a typical consideration with that, or is it all still very customized to each person's needs?
I think it's both customized and there are general things that can be said. So it is clearly true, as anybody who's been in a group of 1,000 people who got these kinds of Dzogchen pointing out instructions, that a few people just hearing that will be like, wow, and flash into super cool territory they never had been before. And it just shows them the way. And that was exactly what they needed to hear, and good on them, right? And so these sort of Dzogchen Mahamudri. And again, those are big, complicated traditions, actually. So this is a shorthand for Western small version Dzogchen and Mahamudra that is not the full grand complicated things that you actually find in their original, and is basically shorthand for wide open, immediate, however it's happening, sort of taking result as method kind of practices, right? So I'm some scholar of this is freaking out right now, but you know what I mean? Like the pop culture version of the terms is what I'm meaning. Sorry to any sticklers.
Maybe we could have just a 20-second contextual differentiation between Vipassana and then that other class, attention-based versus awareness-based. Maybe that's the...
Yeah, okay. So there's the Dzogchen stuff. And then there's the Vipassana-ish sort of thing where you notice sensations of breathing, and you notice a thought as a thought. You notice that this is a that. And there's this active, this is that is this, I see this, I notice that, I identify this. There's this breath, there's this mental impression, there's this sensation, there's this intention, right? There's a sound, there's a thought, there's this very much like I am going to build up a capacity linearly to notice all the things in my experience using noting or, body scanning or, focus on breath or whatever it is. You're going to train attention and all these basic skills and fundamental perceptual things that you're going to build up to some big collective thing that hopefully eventually becomes everything and, becomes stream entry or some higher path or whatever map you're using, right? And so both of these things can be super useful and valuable. And if you happen to be one of those people who you give them like, this is just it all right now as it is, how could it be otherwise? You know, people that are just so ready and ripe for that. And that's just all you needed to drop from the tree as a ripe piece of fruit. Okay, cool. But that's not most people. And most people, given those instructions, are just going to kind of space out and be like, okay, this is it. But, and then they're thinking about their back pain or their childhood again or whatever. Right. And so those people who, when they're given the pointing out instructions, if you don't really flash into something cool and then kind of sustain it or whatever, are going to probably need to train to a point where you go through these stages and you get to this place where you're all tight and constricted and then someone gives you that kind of instruction. You go, oh, yes. And you remember, or, you know, remember the openness and the expansiveness and the naturalness and the fluidity and the just thisness and all of that. And you get to equanimity and that gets you your path or whatever. And then it's also true that from a sort of a path, as we were talking about earlier, progression point of view, that as you get towards the later paths, right, third path in particular is this big shift where these sort of Dzogchen-y, Mahamudra-y, immediate, transient, ephemeral, luminous, empty, but full, but, you know, whatever, integrative kind of perspectives start making a whole lot of sense and start being super applicable for filling in, you know, this sort of vast, open, inclusive realization thing. But then there's also the point that sometimes really kind of fine-grained technique to identify like last little outliers of subtle layers that are not well illuminated by the grand open thing, that can also be really valuable. And so I think it's cool to have both tools or sets of tools or categories of tools in the toolbox. It's good to have an appreciation of whether or not they're working for you or not, and also appreciation of the range that there may be a lot of oscillation when they're good, when they're not, to be able to move back and forth and have some sort of intuition as well as theory that helps guide that.
Yeah.
Great.
Long answer.
Awesome.
Very helpful.
No, super like detailed and very, I'm learning so much today, guys. God, I didn't think I was going to learn any. I didn't think that I was planning on learning much today. Oh God, I've had a whole seminar this afternoon. This has been bloody phenomenal.
Here's a question for you before you get to yours. What's your, like, when you go to bed tonight and you're just going to be lying in bed, what are you going to be, are you going to be concentrating on your breath? Are you going to be like doing some like body stuff, your thoughts, your, you know, or is it just going to be, you know, none of that?
Do you want honesty, or do you want the answer that I would like to say in front of Daniel while he's on the call?
Go for
it. The honest truth is, I'm scared, bro. Like the honest truth is, I'm scared. I find meditation scary. I have some personal demons that I have inside of me that I find scary to break into. And so my honest answer is I probably won't be thinking about that tonight when I go to bed. It is probably my most honest answer. But the best version of me and the version of Bodhi that is trying to improve and progress says, I will probably be focusing on my breath and trying to get to a place of deeper relaxation than I have in the last couple of months.
If demons are what's going on, do you want to talk about the demon thing, and we can talk about like dealing with demon tech, right? Because that would then suddenly seem super interesting.
And I think other people would also appreciate that as well. This fear of closing your eyes and just being with yourself is not, you know, particular to you both. This is a big, huge chunk of the population that have heard about mindfulness and heard about the benefits and all this stuff. They close their eyes and they're like, nope, not going there. So I think it might be a useful little topic to jump into, Daniel.
Yeah. What are your any
what are the demons? Tell me about the demons, man.
As a true sorcerer, wizard, mage,
right?
The answer is I guess addiction. I guess in some ways sexuality, and
those are huge ones and very commonly found, right?
Yeah, and another one would be great God, this is fucking, yeah, I guess being a good person. So in a weird way, I don't, it's not that I don't think I'm a good person, it's that I worry that I'm not doing enough. For some reason, I always worry that I'm not doing enough and that I'm not contributing enough and that I'm not helping certain peoples in a certain way. And, you know, I could have, rather than taking that 20 minutes to myself, I could have been telling Tom that I love him more, or spending time with my missus or whatever. So yeah, there's a mess of demons. But those are some of the more ones that are big within my life, I would say, ones that I definitely tend to avoid.
But they're also angels, right? So the angel that wants you to not be, whatever bound in whatever addictions you're in, right? That's the recognition of that quality. The angel that does care and wants to do good in the world. The angel that does want you to be okay with whatever sexuality things are going on, or feelings of guilt or survival guilt, or that you're not doing enough. Like, those are all angels as well. And so you find that most demons have this other side to them, right? So like, where you can find the compassion and the well-wishing and the beautiful ideals and the sense of purpose, and that is also bound up in those questions, and that's what makes them workable and interesting and gives them their energy and spark, because if you didn't have that, you wouldn't give a fuck and they wouldn't trouble you, right? And so the only reason they're troubling is because of the angel aspect, right? And so if you're, so that's a really important thing to spend some time investigating. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, do you know what's interesting is, I think the one thing that I'm proud of at my life at the moment as a 23-year-old, and right, I'll clarify this in a second, but the one thing I'm very proud of as a 23-year-old is that I can sit across from you at the moment and tell you at least what those demons are, and that I've been able to go internally and look at myself in a way that I can be honest about what those are, and do that. Now, am I at a point in my life where I want to tackle those? Am I at a point in my life where I want to implement strategies such as mindfulness, meditation, other things to tackle those things? The answer is, if I'm honest, no. I'm at a place where I'm so thankful that I've been able to admit that I even, like, the addiction one was a big thing for me in my childhood, and Tom knows this. We went around the block, especially when me and him were butting heads as father and son, about my addiction, and he, for years, like, just to be honest, Tom would say, "You are addicted," and I would go, "No, fuck you, I'm not. Like, you can't define what I am. Like, no, not up to you." Years on, though, I know I am. Like, being honest, I am, and I suffer, and I reap the benefits, but I also suffer as much as anyone who is addicted to anything. And the honest truth is, I'm very glad that I'm able to talk about where I am at this point in my life. But following that, like I said, I want to clarify in terms of the angels and demons things. I'm not honest about it to everyone, though, which is another thing that is weird, because and I doubt they will ever watch this, but my girlfriend's parents don't know about my addiction. They don't know where I stand on that, and and it's not something that I am prepared to even talk to them about at this point. But it's something that I'm able to admit to you and probably hundreds of people that watch this on the internet. But for me, it's really weird.
Huh?
It's this hard space, dude. You're navigating weird space of moral intentions, as well as also moral consequences from everything as well. So it's weird. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
Wow. Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, we all have our things we struggle with. I actually, every single day, deal with imposter syndrome. So while it is true that I have an MD and an MSPH in epidemiology and all this meditation training and background, I get up every single day and I think, really, I'm going to talk to these people about meditation and try to help them? Really, I'm going to try to, help with the organization of this massive international research consortium? I mean, I've never done anything like that. How in the world could I possibly do that? And so literally every single day, multiple times a day, I have those kinds of thoughts of self-doubt. And that's actually totally common in the world of professionals. I used to have it every day driving to the ER. Every single day driving into the ER, I'd be like, why am I driving to the ER? I don't know anything about emergency medicine. And then I would get there and know something about what to do. And it turns out these kinds of things are actually super common. And even like when I take breaks from like working on my projects, I go, why am I taking a break? To play my guitar or something? Shouldn't I just be going over those bylaws again to make sure they're really good, or figuring out our fundraising strategy in further detail, or whatever it is? And so I actually all day long feel those, feelings of those same kinds of things of inadequacy, and am I doing the right thing, and all of that. Even though I dedicate, the vast majority of my hours of my day to volunteering to help, I still don't feel it's enough. So I totally get that.
Is it my turn?
Yeah, sorry.
Hi, I'm Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call mine imposter syndrome. I'd call it these feelings of inadequacy, these feelings of, now I'm 55, and not as young as I was, and it's kind of snuck up on me a little bit, and I feel like I still haven't left a lasting mark, and I know that's unfair to myself, because I influence people around me. There's a if I'm the stone and I drop it into the mill pond, those ripples are real, right? And I've impacted and helped people, but in my mind, there's so much more to do. There's so much more to do, and I feel the clock almost always just ticking, right?
Oh yeah, I feel that too.
Yeah, and it's maximizing that time, staying healthy, staying alert, staying healthy of body, of spirit, of mind, so that I can go the long race and see what at the end is the tally. And I don't mean that in some sort of achievement. Maybe there is a bit of it as an achievement, maybe even ego type way. But for me, it's like what we're doing right now with Bodhi. This is a huge thing for me, because it's something that goes beyond my life and into his experience and his our relationship together, that then can go on to further aspects of relationships beyond us, that impacts in ways that is really important to me. And having people like you, Daniel, on the podcast to share out messages is super important to me. So this is a little space that I've explored, that I've found, that I've really enjoyed and want more of. But I feel the clock. I continually feel it's, the pendulum of the clock just going behind me. And it's almost like I keep looking back, and I keep like you said, should I even be strumming my guitar right now?
And do you know what? That brings me so much pain. I want to clarify this on air, that you saying that, Tom, brings me pain. And I'll explain why. Because you being like feelings of inadequacy, and I'm sure like both ways, because we love each other, but you being like feelings of inadequacy, and also going, that there's this clock and there's so much more to do. Like, dude, you have achieved so much. You are a genius within your own right, and you don't even like clock it. And it's crazy to me, because the amount of inspiration you spread amongst just people that we know is like even just referencing the thing that Mum told me about, the recording that you made that has now been passed around, 15, 20 NHS nurses that are now sleeping well because of a guided meditation that you happen to record, like just for one of T's friends. Like, it hurts me that I know that even when it comes to the last section of your life, I don't think you're going to be satisfied with what you have done. And I don't think you're ever going to be fully like, I did everything I could do. And what bums me out about that is that in the moments where you are playing your guitar, you're not enjoying playing the guitar, which is what bums me out more than anything. So in response to that, I think you're a badass, and I think, and the clock thing is so funny, dude. It's now 20. As soon as I hit 20, the clock appeared for me. I was like, oh, what the fuck is that? I was like, that wasn't there before. Like, what the shit is that? And even at 20, I'm like, holy fuck, I need a job that's gonna like support a house at some point, and like a family, and like, or if I want a dog, like it needs insurance, like. And it's
that's some evil shit, right? But yes.
do you know what I mean? Like it becomes that whole time thing where you're like, oh my god, like I need to, like if I want to do things, I need to take steps. And so like, and really in the last year, I've really begun dedicating myself to it, Tom, and feeling what you feel, feeling that like referring back to the tabletop game, I want to be the best DM. That is a fact. It's not a like goal, or it is what I will be. I know I will be, because I fucking believe it, and I will do everything in my power to get there. But like I can't even describe that. I don't even know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's this weird place of, it makes me sad that I know that the clock is ticking for you, because you are such an awesome person that doesn't deserve to have that pressure on their shoulders. It's kind of what I'm saying.
No, I appreciate that, and it's not as grim as it sounds. Let's put it that way. There are definitely moments of satisfaction, and yeah, definitely moments of contentment and of peace, and certainly mindfulness has been a big part of that. Just find that, that inner peace then becomes outer peace, and you've seen it, Bodhi, that I'm not the monster that I was 10 years ago, and so that's a good thing. You know what though? Let's just pivot to one
From
more
monster
thing.
to master. That would be a great book.
It's a good name of a book.
It's Eminem, from monster to master.
Speaking of dungeon master or monster to master, what's your experience with Dungeons and Dragons, Daniel? Have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons? I think I talked to you once before, and you played back a previous version of it. Is this in your younger days?
Yeah, so I started with literally the first version back when it was, the old little books. Before advanced. I have a first edition, Player's Handbook, first edition Monster Manual, first edition Dungeons Master's Guide. But there was the old book that was just the box that was just Dungeons and Dragons with the old blue book, and then there were old brown books even before that, right? So this has gone. I started on those. So this has gone through a whole lot of iterations, and I played through the first edition from the time I was 10 to 16. So this is like 1979 through 1985-ish. And then sometimes on summers and stuff, like 85 to 87. And then all of a sudden it just disappeared from my life. And I was in college, and I wasn't around anybody who was playing, and I was doing bands and music, and all of a sudden that took over my life. But for many years, that was one of my favorite things to do, and would spend 10, 15, 20, 25 something hours a week playing Dungeons and Dragons through my early to mid-teens. That was just amazing times, and made great friends, and had a lot of fun, and learned a lot about life, about magic, about risk taking and loss and strategy and relation, all kinds of stuff, communication, and just odds and stakes and creativity. And I was usually dungeon master for a lot of that period, and so a lot about how to give people challenges that are not too challenging, but let them reap the consequences of their actions, but have some compassion in there too. And so it was a fascinating bit of training and development, and I'm incredibly glad that I went through that phase. And actually, a friend of mine just got me the latest edition, party pack of the books and some really cool new dice, and I just haven't had much time to look at it, because again, I'm trying to figure out how to save the world. But
literally, not like,
yeah,
not
but still, it would be tremendous fun to play. Actually, I would love to play again. It was so much fun, and it looks like it's come a long way. I was really excited by a lot of the developments of character classes and races and all that. It seemed a lot more flushed out, and that was really cool to see.
Yeah, well, we're working, not to give away too much, but we're working on a setting that's set up in the sky with airships and all of the magical elements that you could ever think of. It's been a hugely creative process and a lot of work, but it's been very satisfying. We just had a session yesterday, but by the way, how you lose time and when you're sitting in meditation at times, whether you're doing a fire scene or whatever, you can sometimes, if you're in a space, whether you're in an equanimity space or in a jhanic space or something like that, you can literally come out of it and be like, oh, that was 2 hours, or that was 2.5 hours. That felt like about 35 minutes. It's the same with D&D, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
You can there is something weird going on there.
Yep.
We sat down
7 hours
gone like that.
Yeah.
Literally. It's I think, do you know what it is? I think for anyone that is laughing right now because we're talking about Dungeons or Dragons, or is the ripped guy in a tank top who's like, oh, these nerds are like,
I used to play with the ripped guy in the tank top. Was one of my friend
amazing.
Brian Moran, the serious kung fu guy, by the way, with serious musculature, was one of the guys I played D&D with, actually.
That's incredible. It's one of those things where you don't understand it until you experience it. It's one of those things where and you need to, and the way that I can even just like introduce, like my advice in terms of introduction, if people are like, haha, D&D, or you're not ha, or you're very into it, please go and watch like Acquisitions Incorporated, Critical Role, Dimension 20. You know, these are places where you can get some of, like, their campaigns are unbelievable. And it's like watching a TV show that is 1,000 times better because it's completely not restricted by budget, not restricted by, you know, the lack of CGI or making something look realistic, because it's all in your head. And so don't get me wrong, obviously there's things where you've got miniatures and you've got like maps and battle maps and tokens and, you know, things like that. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to, and the reason why I can advise anyone to play D&D, is because it brings you together with your friends. You spend hours of your life doing things, laughing, having fun with some of the closest people, or you will form bonds with these people and become the closest of friends. Not to mention, if you are the dungeon master, or you're someone who is very much loving writing a deep, rich backstory, there's nothing more creative on this entire planet than building a world from literally going, cool, so there's nothing, and now I've made something, and what governs that, and what ethereal entity or what plane, and oh, now, like, starting from universe down to the finest grain of sand. Why is there a beach on this? Like, you know, and I think for anyone to understand that, you have to read into it, and you have to watch, and you have to see what people do. But the honest answer is, if you like movies, if you like games, if you like anime, if you like TV shows like Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, like that kind of thing with that level of character development and stuff, D&D is actually for you. And I know it's Dungeons and Dragons, which sounds fancy, but for example, Dimension 20 does things like the Unsleeping City, which is based in New York. They do Fantasy High, which is based in a high school set in the modern age. So they have mobiles, they have cars, they have standard stuff. So you don't have to do the Lord of the Rings, which is what everyone pictures, the, you know, high fantasy, you know, elves and dwarves and, you know, save the world from darkness, you know, kind of journey that everyone kind of pictures. But it really is this amazingly magical and creative space that nothing really else comes close to, if I'm honest. Like,
yeah. It's been a super cool experience. Super cool.
Yeah,
experience.
totally agree.
100%. Daniel, I have one more for you from our list, and the reason I wanted to ask this is because for me, I love you as a person because of what you do, what you say, and what you stand for. Now, something else that I've come to very much appreciate about you is your positivity, your constant ray of sunshine. Now, even on this Zoom call, I'm experiencing this bright light that's hitting me. You know, you're just happiness incarnate. You're a bundle of happiness, is how I describe it. I wanted to ask, obviously, I've known you since you've been meditating through your practice, and actually from the point of already having reached a place of enlightenment. Were you the same excited, happy, positive person before your practice? And not only that, but how far into your practice did you feel things changing? Because some people, we had a few questions that were like, how far into the practice do you really start feeling things kind of happen? So what were you like before? What was give us an image of Daniel Ingram pre-meditation. I'm super interested in that.
Yeah, so like me in my teenage years, like my early mid-teenage years, I could be super happy and enthusiastic, but I was pretty dark and angry a lot of the time too. So I, had some, we could debate the degree to which it was valid for me to be angry about those things, but there was a reasonable amount of structural things in my life that super pissed me off and I was not happy about or sad about, or I was grieving or whatever combination of those things. And so, but I definitely had this enthusiastic part of me that could come out and be very, very up, right? So, and then the degree to which I stayed in that in general has sort of, if you look long term, has definitely shifted farther and farther and farther towards this sort of up happy Daniel that you find me. But in the middle, there were some super challenging dark periods, right? Some of my like deep dark stuff before I got stream entry in India when I was challenged, that was really hard times. There's a lot of that was trudging and stuff. And yeah, I could still be bright and have a sense of humor sometimes, but there was a lot of pain and challenge there. And even some in the middle territory where there were some really cool meditation abilities and I could get into these deep jhanic states and had integrated, awakening to some sort of mid path, second, third pathish, multiple cycles, who knows, kind of middle territory. Yet still, it could be pretty darn dark sometimes. And then there were circumstantial stuff like, the last 2 years of medical school, the hard clinical years where you're working 100 hours a week or whatever and sleeping every other night and, that crazy stuff in residency, that could just be really physiologically challenging, even despite realization. And, we can all get, overworked and grumpy and cranky when we get sleep and food deprived and don't have any downtime, right? So, you got to take that into account. For a lot of my years, I was doing intensive professional training, but it is definitely true. There was just a quantum shift that when something.
Oh, we just lost you, Daniel. Tom, do you start, Daniel?
No, I think we just lost you.
Audio wise, I think we just lost you audio wise, Daniel.
We'll just see if that comes back.
I'll let you know when it comes back.
Talking about the quantum shift that.
Hold on a second.
There we go.
Perfect. Got you back.
Kinda, but it's not the right thing. Heck. Do you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Perfect.
Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, now you hear me. Sorry, technical glitch. Something just
That's okay.
right. System.
That's right.
So there is definitely the shift that happened in April 2003, where there's before and after the world was just way fucking better. So the difference between like 99% enlightened and 100%, everything's just seeing itself as it is and doing its thing, which is, again, sorry for the people I've just annoyed by saying that, but it was a quantum leap in terms of, okay, that was what I was looking for. And so so the path is non-linear, just realize that. But like after stream entries, suddenly like I've snapped out of the dark wreck my life period of giving everything away and canceling all my medical school interviews and wrecking doing challenging things that sort of made my marriage relationship not as good and all of that stuff, like, and all of a sudden I'm like going back to grad school and applying to this, that, like all of a sudden there was a big shift up. But was it like everything I was looking for? No. So there were these like down lows and then highs, but then there were these plateau like shifts where everything kind of lofted up and was better. But still, even like in the later cycles, there could still be some pretty challenging phases, but they got shorter and shorter and shorter. So like dark night periods that would last for like months or years started lasting, weeks or sometimes days or even sometimes just hours in terms of like big progress cycles. And so it did get faster and easier and better, but there was that last shift, and everything since then has been like, yeah, on that front. So if you're doing this, just realize it's a complicated answer, and hopefully this will have some normalization for your own complicated journey.
Can I ask another question? Were you full head of hair back then, or beard? Like, what was the hair situation back in the day?
Back in the day, wow. So in high school, I had pretty long hair, and then I got really long into this sort of crazy, like flock of seagulls looking thing kind of on top with like long mullet down to my waist in the back. And then I like shaved that all off. And then I had various sort of like kind of normally hairstyles through a lot of my graduate school and training. And then but I started losing my hair in my early mid 30s somewhere, and then have been shaving it for some number of years just because, but I can imagine it growing out. Sometimes I think, fuck it, I'm retired. I should just like grow out some big crazy thing in the back, like a big kind of like imagine like the back of my hair just like this big around, and grow it out into like a massive ponytail, but it would kind of stop here. So if you looked at me from the front, I'd look just like this. But from the back, you'd see this like huge, thing, because this is thick hair back here, right? That hasn't been affected at all. And so sometimes I think about doing something wild like that. I don't know if it has it's not really a defined style that I know of, but yeah, like about a 3-inch wide by like 4-inch high thing, and just grow that out.
Do you know what? It sounds like a kung fu. It sounds like a kung fu master type thing, and do you know what was interesting? The reason I asked that
like
question,
really straight sides to it, so it had this really defined edge.
Nice. I was gonna say that's bloody funny. That's great. I think that's amazing. I was actually gonna ask, was it that when the realization April in 2003 was it just like, wow, like I feel better about the world. I need to shave my fucking head. I didn't know if it was like damn, like everyone once they hit that stage, you're like, dude, I need to start shaving. Like it makes me more streamlined in my meditation.
Yeah, it was only, I don't know, 5 or so years ago I started shaving my head on a semi-regular basis. I had done it before, but yeah, now it's just easier, and my wife likes it, and yeah, I think it looks better. I think I look younger. Vanity.
I have
Nice.
a last question for you, Daniel, and it's a quickie, and it's based on a question that was brought in through Reddit. But someone asked, what is your hunch? What is your hypothesis on how many people there are currently in the world that have attained arhatship as per your definition?
Ah, God, that's a tough one. And the problem is the vast majority of these people stay closeted, right? So, and the monks don't talk about it. So it's very, very hard to get good data on the monastic world. But if my friend circle of probably something like a 10-to-1 ratio of out to not out is any indication, and then I think about the people I know, I would say certainly hundreds. I mean, I would really be surprised if the number wasn't at least some reasonable number of hundreds. It could be thousands. That was, I don't know, if I somewhere between low hundreds to mid-low thousands would be my range I would expect, but this is super hard to know and guess on for a whole host of reasons. You know, cross-tradition terminological problems, people being closeted, you know, monks and nuns being forbidden to talk about it, etc. This is challenging stuff. I don't know. That's something like that.
It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I've asked most of the questions that were on my list of, and I thank those of you that contributed questions from Reddit and from the Dharma Overground. Really appreciate that. Hopefully that's been helpful for you and for others that haven't contributed questions but have had the opportunity to listen to them and to hear this sort of wide-ranging, flowing conversation that's hit on certainly meditation aspects, technical and theoretical and otherwise, but also just life stuff as well. So really appreciate you watching. Daniel Ingram, we sincerely appreciate your time again, not just as a friend, which I feel very, very honored, I guess, to say that it's been awesome to get to know you over the last few years and to continue our friendship and to watch it grow. So that's been really, really rewarding, but also to watch you flourish out in the world and to continue to, in the best spirit of being a wizard or a mage or a sorcerer, you know, like seriously, like you're out there and you're doing your thing, and it's incredible. It's very, very inspiring, and it certainly energizes me in our aspirations for ourselves as well. So thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to shout out to anyone that's watching as far as something that you're working on or anything else?
Well,
Yeah,
just thanks
plugs.
to both of you. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, if you want to plug, like you mentioned your info handle earlier for people to get at you about that. Like, let us know where people can contact you, where like if they want to, if they have questions or all that kind of stuff. In the section, feel free to do that as well. Sorry for interrupting you. Go for it, Daniel.
Oh, it's totally cool. No, it's all right. And yeah, thank you so much to both of you as well. I want to give a shout out to my friend Anna, who's got a cool book out, The Dark Side of the Dharma. You can find this on AEON books, as well as you can find it on the standard big booksellers or whatever. But Dark Side of the Dharma by my friend Anna, highly recommended. Really cool, interesting stuff. That's just, yeah. And you know, thank you all for whoever's made it this far, for listening, for being interested in these topics. And I just hope this is somehow helpful to your own practice. And if it isn't, fuck it, go find something else. You know, it's a huge world out there.
Fully Fully agree. Guys, this has been an amazing episode. It's been an absolute pleasure to have all of you join us for the journey. I hope, like Daniel said, you got something out of it. But if not, hey, fuck it. As always, guys, hit us with the Holy Trinity. That is like and follow on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and share one of our podcasts on any one of your social media platforms, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Bebo, MySpace, anyone that you're on, share out one of our podcasts. But guys, thank you so much. We've been Homie and the Dude, Daniel Ingram. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Later. We're chugging through. We're loving doing this stuff for you guys. If you want to support us, if you want to make sure that we can keep getting, better quality set, better quality lights, make the filming better.
Bigger batteries for the camera.
Bigger batteries for the camera.
Yes.
All that kind of stuff. You can do that by just liking, following the page, and subscribing to the YouTube channel. That is what really makes a difference to us.